by Councillor Clare, second by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, we have one proclamation on the agenda, and we have Ms. Jensen here. Hi, come on up. Voting right up there. And this is to speak to Lyme Awareness Month. Welcome.
Hello, thanks again for seeing me. Ditto last year, how about that?
That works.
I was like, I don't know if I should just ask it for it to be every May, or do I come up here every year? I don't know. But I do have full intentions again of asking you to proclaim Lyme Awareness Month for the month of May. I've reached out and communicated with Mountain FM, now again with Mags 99. They're going to do a really cool sign for me this year. So I think it's a little building, you know, and again, I've also been informed about my table, information table at the park, Ocean Park, so that's been good. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, I just want to know if I could have a council support and as I continue in the education of Lyme.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you for coming again. And I think we do have to do these yearly.
Yeah, I thought
in
so.
November future councils.
Exactly.
However, I would love to receive a motion to declare, moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Kent, that May be declared a Lyme Awareness Month in the District of Squamish.
Yes.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your work. I have family members that have this, so it's
Heart goes out to
important,
them.
and there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding out there, so good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, there was another little question. On my letter, I noticed I asked if the council would be willing to support perhaps something more visible in terms of some, I think in the email to Sarah, some green lighting or something that.
We can absolutely do that, and why don't we work with staff and we'll see what you want, what we
Okay,
can do,
cool.
and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I just saw Niagara Falls did their whole falls all green, and I was just like, oh, it doesn't have to be the. Oh, wouldn't that be awesome? Keep dreaming. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Consideration of unscheduled public attendance. This is for anyone who has an emergent matter that cannot be dealt with by the next council meeting. Don't see anybody. We have one timed item. First up is development variance permit number 132, Quest Student Residences.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Daly, Development and Subdivision Coordinator with Community Planning. This is a development variance permit application to vary the setback requirements for 3 student residence buildings previously approved under Development Permit 215. The variances are required as a result of a proposed subdivision application. The subject property is located at 3180, 3190, and 3200 University Boulevard. The specific area requiring the variances has been highlighted. Zoning is University Campus 1. Neighboring properties are zoned University Housing 1. Development Permit 215 was issued in 2004 for the first phase of development of the university. This development permit consisted of academic and university service buildings, an athletic center, and 10 student residence buildings. Development Permit 215 did not make provisions for individual legal titles for each student resident building. The proponent desires to construct each student residence building on separate legal parcels. A similar proposal, a subdivision, Subdivision 372, and development variance permit number 74 for the 2 existing student residence buildings was approved in 2013. As a result of a subdivision application, new property lines will be introduced between the buildings. To maintain the siting approved under Development Permit 215, variances are required to Section 4.11A, projections into required setbacks, and Section 20.4, minimum setbacks for principal buildings in the University Campus 1 zone, to allow portions of the buildings and their eaves to project into required setbacks. Requested variances are as follows. For Lot C, Building S3, to vary section 4.11A, projections into required setbacks to allow eaves to project from 0.61 meters to 1.2 meters, and section 20.4C, side lot line setback from no principal building shall be located within 7.62 meters of a side lot line to no principal building shall be located within 3.13 meters on the west property line and 4 meters on the east property line. For Lot D, Building S2, to vary section 4.11A, projections into required setbacks to allow eaves to project from 0.61 meters to 1.2 meters, and section 20.4C, side lot line setback from no principal building shall be located within 7.62 meters of a side lot line to no principal building shall be located within 4 meters on the west property line and 3.25 meters on the east property line. For Lot E, Building S1, to vary section 4.11A, projections into required setbacks to allow for eaves to project from 0.61 meters to 1.2 meters, and section 20.4A, front lot line setback from no principal building shall be located within 7.62 meters of a front lot line to no principal building shall be located within 5.4 meters of a front lot line, and section 20.4C, side lot line setback from no principal building shall be located within 7.62 meters of a side lot line to no principal building shall be located within 4 meters on the west property line. The siting of the buildings is consistent with the campus site plan approved under Development Permit 215. The requested variances are only required as a result of the proposed subdivision. The location and character of the proposed buildings was already approved under Development Permit 215. Legislated and district processes for engagement were followed for this application. Notifications were mailed and hand-delivered to properties within 100 meters. One comment was received requesting a stop sign at the corner of University Boulevard and the Crescent due to increased traffic in the area. No requests for a public information meeting were received. Staff recommend the development variance permit number 132 for the property at 3180, 3190, and 3200 University Boulevard be approved, and that the mayor be authorized to execute the permit. Staff alternatively recommends that the District of Squamish not authorize the issuance of development variance permit number 132.
Thank you. And because this is a development variance permit, we do permit the public to seek the variance, but I'll read this quickly. The proponent and members of the public will be given the opportunity to be heard or present written submissions respecting the following requested variances to the District of Squamish zoning bylaw. Section 4.11, projections into required setbacks, proposed variance. Eaves may project 1.2 meters into the front, rear, and side setback area for buildings S1, S2, S3. Section 20.4, minimum setbacks for principal buildings. Lot C, building S3 for subsection C, proposed variances. Reduction of the lot line setback from 7.62 meters to 3.13 meters on the west property line, and reduction of side lot setback 7.62 meters to 4.0 meters on the east property line. Lot D, building S2 for subsection C, proposed variances, reduction of the side lot from 7.62 meters to 4.0 meters on the west property line, reduction of side lot line from 7.62 meters to 3.25 meters on the east property line. Lot E, building S1, proposed variances for subsection A, reduction of the front lot line setback from 7.62 meters to 5.4 meters. For subsection C, reduction of the side lot line from 6.62 meters to 4.0 meters on the west property line. After I have confirmed it is your turn to speak, please approach the podium and commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and address. Please note that speakers will be given a maximum of 5 minutes to address council. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the development variance permit? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the DEP? I think before I go to a third time, I'll just go to council to see if there are any questions for clarification purposes. Councillor Pryor?
Yeah, just curious, does it alter the sub-area plan at all? The subdivision? Does it change the sub-area plan?
The sub-area plan didn't really speak to subdividing the specific student residences on this parcel. As development variance permit number 74 was a similar application that was approved in 2013.
I guess, well, I was curious because I know the sub-area plan talks about different types of use, different types of housing, and I didn't know if the subdivision would take other areas out of that suburban plan, you know what I mean? Instead of having this one lot with 5 buildings on it, we have 5 lots now. Does that affect the suburban plan in the future?
Yes?
No, it does not affect the subdivision plan.
Council, any other questions for clarification purposes? I'll go back out to the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this public, it's not public hearing, development variance permit? Councilor Stowe, question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is there a specific reason why the setbacks are being so varied? Is it to adjust for public space? Is it the name of the rationale?
It's just due to the introduction of the property lines within the buildings. The original DP didn't account for this, so the siting is consistent, but to create these parcels, the lot lines have to go there, so they are required due to that.
I will go to the public again. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this development variance permit? For a second time, is there anyone who would like to speak to DVP 130? And for a third time, is there anyone who would like to speak to this development variance permit? I don't see anyone else. Council? Any consideration here? Councilor Shaw?
Yeah, I don't mind the setbacks for the building being altered at all. If this is a little brownfield at the bottom space that's on the larger,
Would you like to
I'll
move
move
over?
over.
Yep. So there's a mover that we issued DVP number 132 as described by Councilor Snell, seconded by Councilor Race. Do you want to speak more or? Anyone else? Councilor Race?
Thank you. And this is, I think, what development variant permit process is for, is to correct these minor technical impediments to an otherwise valid development. And so I'm happy to support this. I think this is the useful process.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to it? Robin?
So if you want to get set, if you move your computer, it's blocking your mic and the sound isn't coming through. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that might be a problem. I don't see any more hands. Yeah, I'm happy to support this DVP. It's all part of one comprehensive development, and it's just because of the introduction of the property lines that this is required, so I'm happy to support this. I don't see any more hands. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries unanimously. Just a 2-minute recess and we'll move that over there, because I need to write on this side. We are now on to staff, we're on the bylaws. We have first 3 readings of the District of Squamish Purchasing Authority Bylaw number 1721, 2002 Amendment Bylaw 2597, 2018. And following that, we'll have the policy piece.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. My name is Christine Matthews. I'm the Chief Financial Officer. First item in front of you is the Squamish Purchasing Authority Bylaw number 1721, 2002 Amendment Bylaw number 2597, 2018. Staff is recommending that Council give 3 readings. The amendment proposed is to amend Schedule A of Bylaw 1721 with that proposed by amending Bylaw 2597. The amendments include the addition of a senior director position group to the list of delegated authorities and the doubling of delegated authority amounts for each position group. Some background to this: in September 2017 and March 2018 at the Finance and Audit Committee, staff brought forward the discussion on amending delegation levels. There were several rationale for this, not the least of which the rising cost of construction and supply of goods and the increased activity and growth in the municipality was causing an increase in the number of awards that had to go to council. This takes time, obviously, to prepare for agendas, etc., and was creating some inefficiencies in operations. As well, it was producing undue burden on council agendas. As well, we're in the process of developing a new system for the financial management, and we are automating all of the workflows. And to work effectively, it's beneficial to not have to pull purchase orders out of stream and to send them to council. There was some discussion at the time, though, because purchasing is decentralized at the district at the moment, and council did want to maintain some stewardship in the role of purchase activities and awarding contracts until such time as staff had a dedicated procurement person. So they did agree to, the committee did suggest that we do increase the delegated authorities and ask the CFO to bring the bylaw back. So before you today is a request for consideration of 3 readings.
Thank you. Council, any questions on this? Looking for a motion to move the first reading by Councilor Elliott, second by Councilor Chappelle, that Squamish Purchasing Authority Bylaw number 1721, amended by 2007, be the first readings. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move 9A1 up, purchasing delegation and interim policy.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. Staff is recommending that council approve the proposed purchasing policy attached as attachment 1 to the report and repeal all prior purchasing policy and amendments thereto. Please note that was a change in your original motion on the original agenda. Again, in September 2017, Finance and Audit Committee staff brought forward discussions on the need for a new purchasing policy. The rationale included that the current policy was cumbersome and difficult to understand. Over time, inconsistencies had emerged between the purchasing authority bylaws 1721 and the policy, leading to confusion and non-compliance. The current policy referenced approvals that also did not make sense in the context of a decentralized purchasing structure. The current policy was not explicit about contract changes after award of contracts, and the current policy included clauses that contracted more recent treaty, that weren't taking into account recent treaty agreements and case law. In the 2018 financial planning process, Council did approve a project to review the organizational structure, roles, and business processes of the purchasing function, and provided the potential for hiring 1 FTE near the end of 2018. The RFP for that consulting service is now up and being advertised, and we are looking for a closing date of May 3rd. It is anticipated that following that process, there may be further amendments to this purchasing policy. However, given the issues cited, staff recommends that the policy proposed today still be adopted. In March 2018, staff returned to Finance and Audit Committee with a newly drafted policy. Several changes were discussed and are reflected in the document as attachment 1. We've highlighted any changes that we have made to that policy since you last saw it. Changes included clarification that acting mayor and deputy officer positions are included in the definitions of mayor and officers, and the addition of definitions were added for scope of contract and scope changes. In addition, in 5.1.4, we indicate preference for contracts shorter than 5 years. So although we're allowed to take contracts up to, the committee had indicated they would like to consider shorter contract amendment terms. And amendments to section 11 were undertaken to clarify that staff may address changes within the scope of contract, but must return to council for any scope changes, contracts exceeding budget, or delegated authority. Staff is recommending that the District of Squamish repeal the existing purchasing policy and all amendments thereto, and adopt the District of Squamish purchasing policy as presented today.
Council, any questions for staff? Let's see. Would anyone like to firstly put a motion to repeal the previous purchasing policies and amendments? Moved by Councilor Hammond, seconded by Councilor Chappelle. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Would someone like to move the adoption of the purchasing policy as presented? Moved by Councilor Elliott, seconded by Councilor Race. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving back to the agenda, we are on to 8B1, District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500,
Great. I'm just going to ask if everyone can hear me. Great. Thank you very much, Gary. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah McJanet. I'm a community planner with the District of Squamish. I'm here with Matt Gunn to my left and Director of Planning and Community Planning, Jonas Velanishkis. We are before Council tonight for the next milestone and decision point for OCP Bylaw 2500. In the presentation tonight, I'm going to briefly review the approvals process to date and the next steps for the bylaw adoption moving forward. Also, I will discuss minor amendments identified through the public hearing process that are recommended by staff for third reading. Matt is going to take over and talk about some of the substantive OCP feedback and amendments that were identified through the public hearing process for consideration by Council. And then we're going to outline several process options for moving forward. And if and how Council wishes to address any of the substantive amendments in addition to the minor amendments that are presented as part of the recommendation. So here's our Phase 4 OCP approvals timeline. As you know, the phase started back in December 1st of 2017 when we released the full final bylaw. Followed, first two readings were received in on February 20th, 2018. We held the public hearing over 2 days in mid-March. Approximately 90 people came out on March 12th, and we had another 120 citizens attend the March 13th date. Tonight, with the area with the red box, we're giving consideration to next steps, potentially third reading. Council may decide at this point to amend the bylaw and give third reading or direct changes, further changes to the bylaw. And depending on the nature of the changes and whether they relate to use or density and are substantive, there may be a process trigger and requirement for giving further public notice. An opportunity for input on any further changes. So we're going to walk through those pathways tonight shortly. Once the bylaw receives third reading, we will send the OCP Regional Context Statement, which is a component of the OCP, to the Regional District Board, the SLRD Board, for formal approval as required by the Local Government Act before the OCP bylaw may be adopted. Through the public hearing process, we've received many comments of support for the OCP and the public engagement process, as well as requests for changes to specific land use and growth policies. We wanted to pause and just talk very briefly about some of the major themes, reflecting on those major themes that we heard about as documented in the submittal and the public hearing record. They related to managing growth, protecting key assets, environmental, recreation, employment lands, and ensuring adequate services such as health services, emergency, protective services, infrastructure, transportation, and community values, honoring those values and our identity and our brand as we grow and diversify. We also heard from the community through the public hearing about support for environmental protection policies, the integration of estuary management planning, as well as attention to ecosystem function and ecosystem services, supporting needs and connectivity of our local neighborhoods, addressing density, so what is and is not a good fit in our neighborhoods, affordability, our housing inventory, and land supply. So all of the feedback that we received on the plan since December 1st was brought forward to the public hearing process and has been made available to Council and the community for review leading up to and following the close of the public hearing in March. Links were provided to the staff report, and all that material is still up on the website. So in terms of following the review of the public and agency input that was received as part of the public hearing process, and our continued staff review of Bylaw 2500, staff identified a number of minor text-only amendments to the OCP for consideration by Council tonight. These amendments were detailed in Attachment 1 of the staff report, and they've also been handed out on a piece of blue paper for Council. And they are minor and they don't affect use or density, so they are proposed and can be done at third reading without further notice and public hearing. The minor amendments are categorized as housekeeping. They integrate additional input also from our intergovernmental referrals from SLRD and Metro Van. And we've also integrated feedback or input from the Squamish Environment Society. So just to characterize the nature of the housekeeping edits, as we highlighted at the hearing, they have been to fix typos, ensure consistent and clear terminology, adding the clause as amended from time to time when we reference bylaws and policies within the plan, and clarifying that policies and decisions are subject to our legislative public process, so identifying where a formal OCP amendment process would be required. The SLRD requested edits largely included fixing and aligning our RGS, the Regional Growth Strategy bylaw references, description of the services that the SLRD offers, and tweaking the providing an updated SLRD regional population total from the 2016 census. The Metro Van suggestions for minor edits have been brought forward, adjusting a couple policy references to climate and air quality and transportation. There we go. And finally, we also propose an amendment in response to the Squamish Environment Society public hearing concern and request to align the wording of policy 10.10D with the that references the estuary transportation corridor, and there was a desire to see that aligned more closely with the Squamish Estuary Management Plan. So the amendment that's proposed and is added to your list of minor amendments is to amend and replace the word as needed with if and when needed, which is how it's referenced in the Estuary Management Plan. I wanted to highlight for council that in the staff report, this amendment was highlighted, but it wasn't carried over to attachment 1, and so we have actually added it into the list of amendments that you have before you.
So as Sarah highlighted, those amendments that she discussed are considered minor. They can be incorporated as part of third reading. There were other inputs that were received as part of the public hearing process that deal with use or density. They aren't considered minor amendments. They're more substantive, and again, as Sarah mentioned, it would require additional process to address these. And so I just want to go over the major ones that received discussion through the process. They are in regards to 4 different areas, 2 properties, 1100 Bailey, 4000 Highway 99, the 200-meter servicing limit in policy, and some specific growth management policies. So I'll go through these one by one. 1100 Bailey Street is located adjacent to downtown. There was a request received in the public hearing process to include this area within the growth management boundary. And just as a little bit of history on that, in the 2009 OCP, the entire area was designated as parks, greenway corridors, and recreation. In the process of integrating the Squamish Estuary Management Plan with the OCP, this area, part of this area, the part that is located on the former landfill site, was designated as restricted industrial to reflect its land use classification in the Squamish Estuary Management Plan as industrial commercial. So that's one of the more substantive requests.
I just want to clarify that one. It's in the current draft as green white corridor recreation, and there's been a comment received that we consider changing it to mirror this to industrial, correct? Or is it the
No,
other way around?
I should make that more clear. Apologies. So in the current OCP, it's designated parks, greenway corridors, and recreation. In the new OCP, it is excluded from the growth management. It is outside the growth management boundary, and I should also clarify, it is designated as both a mix of parks, greenway corridors, and recreation, and restricted industrial. And the request was to include it in the growth management boundary, and also to, I think, designate it as, no, I think it's just to include it within the growth management boundary, so that there's the opportunity for it to have an application. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
I just want to make sure it was clear. In the current, what's considered for third reading today, it's mirrors the estuary management plan, which is limited industrial.
In the OCP moving forward that we have proposed, the draft that is proposed, that would be considered as part of third reading. This parcel has its split designated.
Yes.
Part of it is parks, greenway corridors, that on the right-hand side. Oh, sorry, it's apologies. The green section is ecological and conservation, apologies. And the hashed pink area is restricted industrial.
And so this is what's in the proposed bylaw currently?
Yes, on the right.
Thank you.
Yeah, the left is just a locator. The right image
I just wanted
is,
to make sure that was clear.
yeah, okay.
But the growth management boundary, it's not included within the growth management area.
It is excluded from the growth
Just
management
wanted to
area.
make sure that was clear.
Yeah, apologies for not being clear. 4,000 Highway 99. There's a request heard through the public hearing process related to this parcel. The request was to include the parcel in the growth management boundary and amend its land use designation from resource and recreation to residential neighborhood. And just to clarify, in the current third draft of the OCP, which is proposed for third reading, this parcel is excluded from the growth management boundary, is outside the growth management boundary, and it is designated resource and recreation in the current draft of the OCP. The request is to include it within the growth management boundary and to amend the land use designation to residential neighborhood. For background, the OCP treatment of this parcel is reflective of its current land use designation, which is limited use, not residential neighborhood, and zoning, which is rural residential. Other inputs included a request to remove the policy which does not support servicing above 200 meters. Developing above 200 meters will require additional infrastructure versus developing at lower elevations where new infrastructure is not needed, and that development would thus be more expensive for the district to operate, maintain, and eventually replace over time. And another group of requests was to eliminate population thresholds in the OCP. This includes eliminating the population threshold of 22,500 prior to considering development applications for future residential neighborhoods with extraordinary benefits. The request also included requests also included elimination of the population threshold of 34,000 for development on future residential neighborhood land. One last request that we want to highlight was to remove or amend the policy precursor requirements. This includes making some or all of the policy precursors discretionary prior to considering development applications for a future residential neighborhood with extraordinary benefits. There was also comments regarding elimination of the policy precursors altogether. If council wishes to make substantive OCB changes, there are two main paths that can be followed. Option one is to rescind second reading, issue second reading with amendments, and hold another public hearing. This process, if we used a very accelerated timeline and we're able to meet all of the fastest possible opportunities, this process could be completed by mid-July. It would require making decisions on which amendments needed to be made and getting that direction from council tonight essentially, or there is another option which Sarah will talk to. But it requires making decisions and moving very quickly. A second option is to proceed with third reading tonight, to adopt the OCP, and then after that have an amending bylaw come forward to initiate any desired substantive changes. And that amending bylaw could be initiated at the adoption of the OCP. It could even happen at the same meeting, and if we were able to move that along at each opportunity as quickly as possible, then the OCP could be adopted in early June, and the amendments, the substantive amendments that are coming forward could be adopted in mid-July. If council does wish to address requests for significant changes to OCP policies, there are strengths and weaknesses to these two different options that we've laid out. Option 1 maintains strong process integrity for the OCP development process. Compared to Option 2, Option 1 does delay the bylaw adoption by a month and represents optimistic timelines and potentially compressed opportunity to make appropriate changes. With no scheduled August council meeting, any delays would push the adoption into September. Option 2 achieves OCP bylaw adoption in early in June and provides more time to reflect on appropriate policy changes. However, there may be negative public perception with an immediate amendment of the growth management policies following OCP adoption.
So coming back to the recommendations that have been put forward tonight as part of the staff report, the staff recommendation for consideration is firstly to give third reading of the bylaw 2500 with the minor amendments that are outlined in the staff report in attachment 1 that's been reiterated in a resolution format on the paper before you, blue paper. And second, that subject to third reading, staff refer the OCP regional context statement to the SLRD immediately to the, for consideration of acceptance. We have, you'll see in the report, outlined a number of possible alternative recommendations for council at its discretion, as Matt walked through as well. And these alternatives really depend on the nature of bylaw changes council may or may not wish to see, if any. So staff are here to provide legislative and process guidance tonight around any recommended bylaw or process guidance around the bylaw approval process, so we continue to meet our legislative requirements as we move towards OCP ultimate adoption. So that's the main staff recommendation. And then these are the 3 alternative recommendations that were also highlighted in the report. So there are the 3. The first highlighted is to give third reading of the bylaw as is without any amendments, essentially the bylaw that was presented at the public hearing. Or where there are substantive changes, as we've mentioned, use density or including amendments to the core growth management policies. There are 2 alternatives that are framed reflecting the options that Matt outlined as follows. So very specifically, the first would be to rescind option 1, essentially rescinding second reading of the bylaw, amending and rereading and giving a second reading again as amended with minor and or major amendments identified by council tonight or at a subsequent meeting, and to schedule a new public hearing. And finally, the second option, which Matt outlined, which is to give third reading to a bylaw with or without the minor amendments, as we've outlined tonight, so that the OCP can proceed to adoption following SLRD approval, and simultaneously to direct staff to initiate a separate amending bylaw or bylaws to address any substantive items identified by council. So going forward, no matter the option pursued, we're looking to work with council tonight to be very clear about any specific amendments if council wishes to see amendments to the plan. We thank you and we look forward to your questions and supporting your decision making tonight.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions? Councillor Kent.
A question, if we were to approve there tonight with those minor amendments and it goes to the SLRD, how much turnaround do we have with the SLRD before it comes back to
Through Mayor Heinzman, the SLRD approval process should not be long. They will need to consider it at one meeting. We have had SLRD staff look at it and give commentary, and it does look like there's a high level of congruence between our OCP and the regional growth strategy. So we anticipate that at the next meeting of the SLRD, we would get our regional context statement accepted, and their meetings are May 23rd is the next one. They happen the 3rd week of each month. So we expect a fairly quick turnaround on
We have on the 4th Wednesday of every month.
Oh, 4th Wednesday.
But it's the 3rd this month, so that's why we can't get it.
Okay, that's tomorrow. Okay.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Spell.
Thank you. So the difference is June or July. If we went back, if we had any large measurements to make, it would be an extra month and another public meeting to ensure we actually have public comments on, and would the public comments be specifically on the changes, or would they be reopen the whole host of
Mayor, through you, the public comments would be on the proposed changes, but also because it would be a bylaw with a new second reading, the entire OCP, like the entire bylaw would be open for discussion ultimately.
And just to build on that, if we did a sidecar amendment process, it's not as laborious as this one. It doesn't have to go to all the referrals to adjacent regional districts, for example, or does it? It wouldn't have to, context statement would be approved, so we wouldn't have to go to the SOE, correct? I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Probably the biggest difference between the two, my impression is that the biggest difference between the two is that the RCS statement, if we went with option one, if we're assuming that there's interest in making some substantive changes, with option one, we delay getting the RCS considered by the SLRD, the regional context statement considered by the Squamish Rural Regional District, and so that pushes out our timeline. If we go with option two, because the regional context statement can be considered while we're working on the amendment, then when that amendment goes forward, we don't have that regional context statement referral process. It will be, and the amendments likely wouldn't cause inconsistency with the regional context statement, and thus we would not have to do that regional context statement referral again. I believe that's
It depends on the nature of the
it
changes.
does depend on the nature of changes, but with what we've talked about, I don't believe it would trigger that.
Councilor Shaw, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I'm wondering, the road boundary changes are substantive. They would have to adhere the
It does depend on the changes to the regional, to the growth management boundary. There is already some discrepancy between the existing, the proposed growth management boundary and the existing settlement planning areas. And so our regional context statement actually speaks to some of those with identifying a strategy to address those over time, which is what is the process if you have discrepancies. So just depending on which changes are proposed, that it may or may not be, may or may not cause a change that requires the regional context statement to be updated. And from what we're talking about here, I don't see that being a likelihood. It is possible. If there was significant change, it could happen.
Go ahead, just one more. Was our previous growth management strategy adopted, the 2005 growth management strategy adopted and sent to, and adopted by regional growth strategy as well? Was it included in the regional growth strategy?
So the growth management, it was not here, but
No.
yeah, it predated. Yeah. So my understanding is that that growth strategy was an input to the OCP, the 2009 OCP, and so the information from that would have fed into the OCP, which then would have been part of the regional context statement that was approved by the Squamish Regional District.
Council, any questions for clarification purposes? Councilor Carter?
Well, I can see a couple on here that I'd like to see changed. So,
Minor amendments?
no, substantial amendments.
Okay, so staff have outlined some options for council to consider. Council Brian, anything else?
Well, I just,
Question?
I mean, I heard staff kind of say that adopting it tonight and then doing the change is kind of the way staff think would be the best to go. Is that what I'm hearing, or?
So our staff recommendation is to adopt the current third with the minor amendments as proposed, and then we've outlined the process that could be selected by council if there is interest in pursuing substantive amendments, and there are pros and cons to the two different options that we've outlined, and it's up to council as to which of those is desired and which of the pros and cons.
What's your favorite?
I think staff have outlined two options, and it's really up to council to determine which options they'd like. Options if we are considering substantive changes.
They live this stuff.
They do, but they want to stay out of the debate, I suspect.
I may, our recommendation is to proceed with the third reading and proceed to adoption. And then from there on, council has an option to, if council wishes to make changes, to come back with another amendment or peel this back now.
I mean, I don't mind that. My only worry is we'll lose track of the substantial amendments. That's my only worry. So is there any kind of safeguard to those if we say we want a couple of those substantial amendments tonight? Is there a safeguard that we're gonna get them done?
Through Mayor Heinzman. So it's a good question. If your concern is that you want to make sure that those substantive amendments are made before adopting the OCP, then option 1 ensures that would happen, because you are not adopting the OCP until those substantive amendments are made. It does include the potential of it, because it's a more complicated process and it opens up everything and it has to happen faster. It does have the risk of some delays, and if the delays push further out, there is more risk of the process not being completed. The flip side, the option 2, it does involve adopting the OCP as it currently sits, but the idea is to have first and second reading for the substantive amendments come at that same meeting. And so you will be talking about adoption of the current OCP at the exact same time as you're talking about the substantive amendments, first and second. Now, it does still involve a bit more process to get to the end, but you're talking about them at the same time adoption.
That's what I like.
Yeah, and so we wouldn't come forward with the adoption without that first and second at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. So
That's option 2, or here it's the last one on the.
well, that's C.
Yeah. C.
I like C.
There's no C,
Whatever.
it says or, but essentially option 2 in the report.
It's option 2 in the report. Yeah.
Questions, Councillor Schwab?
So we had the substantive.
Nobody move.
Amount of public feedback. And my fear is that if we adopt tonight, we are going to lose public feedback. And that I get that we've been working on this for a really long time. And I totally understand the desire to get to the finish line and now push it through. My concern is losing public feedback and trust in the public. This is a public document. Yes, we have the authority to pass it through, but the changes that were recommended by the public at our public hearings were substantive. And I feel like by just adopting it tonight, that we're going to lose this.
We're not adopting it tonight, correct?
No, but we're
Third reading. I just want to make sure it's clear. Yeah.
Third reading is pretty much adoption. You can't make this, you can make them at the same time, but you don't allow the public to comment, and really, the whole document is a public commenting document. So, I'm happy to hear other councillors' arguments against that, but the feedback from the public has to be respected, and what I heard is the growth boundary. And I have some deep concerns that I can lay over out of this context about the growth boundary in certain areas. So I'll allow the mayor to take other comments before.
Yeah, looking for questions. I just want to make sure everyone's questions are answered before we move on. I have Councillor Race next on my list.
Thank you. So I'll give you my favorite way to proceed. I'm going to move third reading with the minor amendments. It's actually set out in full form on the sheet of paper, just for clarity. But it's with the minor amendments that staff outlined, and also includes on this sheet the bolded section which sets out a definition and criteria around extraordinary community benefits and clarifies that. And if it's seconded, I'll speak to that.
Seconded by Councillor Elias.
Thank you. And so this is actually, I think, a very notable time in our history moving forward as a community, because adopting an OCP is adopting a community vision. And as you heard from staff, it deals with a whole variety of areas: land use, recreation, employment, cultural reconciliation, and so forth. I won't list them all. This particular draft is a result of a high level of public engagement, the highest level by far since I've been living in Squamish and serving on council. And I think that we have to commend our staff for that, Mr. Gunn and Mr. Janet particularly, and also the public, I think, who became very engaged for good reasons in this OCP process. The feedback I've had from members of the public is that they are generally very happy with this draft, and it sets out their vision for a community that's dynamic and is looking forward into the future. There have been some issues raised, of course, and we dealt with some of them tonight. And so I wanted to just highlight in the report there's 5 of them, and I'm going to go in a different order. But one of them was, first of all, around 4,000 Highway 99, which is a small piece of land just at the northern boundary on the highway, and that was left outside the growth management boundary. From my perspective, that is a minor anomaly. I didn't really put my mind to it, frankly, as we were going through all of our discussions at council. And there may be one other that I also just heard about just before the public hearing. But I think those are better dealt with in what the mayor referred to as the sidebar, separate resolution. Sidecar, sorry. Separate process. We can deal with it as an amendment to try to go back to second reading at this point. Because of that, I think it would be sort of akin to throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and I don't think that's the productive way to go. But it still is, I think, for me, an outstanding issue, and we can deal with that in the future. Second one was. Second one was 1100 Bailey Street, and that is a parcel of land that has been significantly left outside of the growth management boundary, and staff stated there was a request to include it. And we heard from speakers at the public hearing quite extensively about how they thought this was valuable as a buffer to the estuary and didn't want to see development on it. Without going into that issue, for me, the thing that decides it is the fact that we just completed an integrated flood hazard management plan, a 3-year process identifying flood risks and remedies on both the tidal and non-tidal waters associated with the district. And that particular area is identified as a floodway and is not for future development. So for me, that decides it is absolutely appropriate that it stay outside of the growth management boundary. And I'm not sure if anything could ever be built in that area, but that's a future decision. But for the time being, for me, it's appropriate that it is outside the boundary. The third is the question about servicing above 200 meters. We looked at that at one of our meetings at council with mapping and so forth, and it's actually a relatively small area. And when you look at which parts of it are actually buildable, it's probably even smaller again. And I think that's appropriate because it helps us focus our infrastructure, as staff stated, and we don't have to run infrastructure up to higher levels. The fourth was making policy precursors discretionary. There's a series of policies that are underway, amendments to the zoning bylaw and so forth, that will probably take, staff estimate, a year to a year and a half, maybe up to 2 years to complete. And I think that's important, and I think that is appropriate that those stay in there as having to be completed before we consider much development outside of the growth management boundary. Because I think it's important for us to get it right, and this policy helps us get it right. Most significant issue I came around the growth management boundary itself, or discussions. And there's 2 aspects to it. And first of all, I mean, I think we have to stop and realize that at the moment we are in the middle of an unprecedented amount of development pressure. In my time in Squamish, which is now over 30 years, and working here over 40 years, I've never seen any kind of growth pressure and development pressure like we're seeing now. And if we're going to manage that successfully, hopefully successfully, then we need very robust tools. And staff have come up with this idea of a growth management boundary. I think it's very appropriate, and I think it's the way to do it. So there's two aspects to it. One is to eliminate the population threshold of 22,500. If any of you keep track of these things, this issue came to our council last term. It was brought by the developer, of, the owner of District Lot 510 and 511, 509 and 510, I beg your pardon, which had that requirement that they could not develop until the population got to that threshold. I voted in favor of removing it at that time because I thought it was unfair to target that particular property and not other properties. But now in this draft, it targets everything outside the growth management boundary. So I think it is appropriate. And I think it gives us a moment of pause. And first of all, our population at the last census was just a few people under 20,000. It's increased significantly since then. It's still increasing from all the reports that we get. And we also want the policy work to be done, and I think all of that will happen probably about the same time, within 1 or 2 years. In addition to these large parcels that are outside the growth management boundary, it will be necessary to do significant planning and work prior to making an application. And so I think that won't really set them back in their timing significantly. I don't think it will be much of an issue. The third is the population threshold of 34,000. And we've heard a number of different comments on this. One was good, second comment was bad. But others came along with theories such as the theory of supply and demand, and that if we want housing to be affordable in the district, then we should increase the supply. It's even suggested by one speaker we increase the supply right out to the district boundaries. I get the theory of supply and demand. I took economics courses at university. But the problem is when you apply it to real estate, as we've seen around the lower mainland, when you increase supply, you don't necessarily lower prices. What you end up with is a greater supply of more expensive real estate. It just doesn't always work. And there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, there's other things that impact pricing. There's cost of materials and all kinds of things like that. But also, developers aren't stupid. If you increase the supply, they're not going to let it all go out at one time and glut the market and collapse the market. So it comes out in drips and drabs. Developments are phased, and the price does not come down. There are actually properties in downtown Squamish right now that were zoned before I got on council, before 2008, which are still not built on because developers have not yet decided to release them into the market. So there's no guarantee if we go and zone everything, it'll show up in the market the week after. It could be a long time, and so the prices don't necessarily drop for that. So I think it's appropriate to have a population threshold for that reason, and allow us to concentrate our growth for the foreseeable future within this boundary. But the door isn't absolutely closed. There were other people speaking in favor of developing some properties outside of the growth management boundary, and that may become appropriate. And what this OCP contemplates that the previous OCP did not contemplate with the 22,500 threshold is the possibility that a proposal could come to us that is appropriate to be developed. And it does provide significant community benefits. I think for me that's a high standard. Any rezoning should have benefit to the community, but if we go a little higher than that, something that is significant, and the criteria is laid out in the motion, then the door is open for that proposal to be approved without offending the OCP or without having to amend the OCP. So the door is open for those, not absolutely closed, but this is a management tool. It's a way of managing growth. And so I think it's entirely appropriate it stays in there. So for that reason, I'm supporting the motion that I made, and we can consider, and I know other councillors have comments, and I'll just put my 2 cents in there as well. I think there will be a sidebar discussion. I think it will become public to the people who are affected by it, certainly. We may have some statements to make later on that tonight. It's not part of my motion. We can deal with it separately. And there are possibly other things that we want to talk about. We can do it in the second motion. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Elliott and Councillor Black-and-Wolf. I'll just put everyone on the list.
Thank you. It's not really that great following Councillor Race. I don't know, I either feel like I need to be just and eloquent or keep it really short. Thank you, Councillor Race. I mean, I have to say that I can concur a lot with what my colleague has said. I had the pleasure of being one of the council representatives on the Community Advisory Committee, and that group of community members was so instrumental in helping us shape our engagement around this OCP, making sure that we were reaching all the audiences that we wanted to reach, helping us interpret the feedback in a way that the document is written so that the average person could understand it. And certainly the executive summary was their idea. So they've lent a lot of support in terms of trying to make this a community document, and one that we can all own, and not just a political tool for decision making. So I just want to give them kudos for all the work they did, and certainly Matt and Sarah have pulled very many late nights, I'm sure, and so much work into this OCP. I was able to attend all of our engagement events, and that really helped me hear the feedback throughout as the policies were developed, which was very helpful. And while we did hear some great feedback at the public hearing, I do think that this OCP balances the needs of the community. There are trade-offs, to be sure, but to me an OCP is a living document. It can't anticipate everything that will come our way as a district. We are, as my colleague said, seeing unprecedented growth and opportunities. And I think the document that is before us tonight with the minor amendments as suggested by staff captures the vision of our community. I think they spoke loud and clear. I know that it won't make everybody happy, but I think it finds a pathway to help us manage growth, to make sure that we're putting the right policies in place to help us manage that growth over time. So I'm happy to support the motion on that.
Thank you. Councillor Black-and-Wolf, Councillor Chappelle is on deck.
Yes. The previous two speakers have articulated most of what I would argue are some of the salient points. Just wanting to highlight particularly that one of the strongest messages that was brought forward at the public hearing was the idea that we needed to allow more land supply to bring down prices. And my response to that would be that it is not a simple supply and demand equation for many of the reasons that were already articulated. And as evidence of that, I would also submit that in this unprecedented time, it's this council that has probably approved the highest number of units added to our residential stock of any council, going back many, many years. So, yet we are still struggling with high prices. So I get the idea and accept the challenge to deal with housing prices. I just don't think that not having a growth boundary is going to solve that. And if I did, I would definitely be open to that. But I think the other thing that we really value in our community is access to natural spaces. And if we allow a patchwork, willy-nilly approach to growth and development, that will severely compromise and change the character of our community. So I think staff have given us a good, robust and flexible approach that with the policy precursors as well as the extraordinary benefit, there is still an opportunity for applicants to come forward with proposals. I think the other thing that maybe hasn't been discussed too much is I really observed that I believe we are on that tipping point in terms of our transportation options in town. We're just almost at that critical mass where we can really start to see some significant opportunities where people don't have to rely on their car to get around everywhere. And if we don't deal with that now and focus in development, then coquitlam and stuff, which are very far flung and grown substantially, but there's nothing in your neighborhood and everybody still has to drive. And I would submit that that actually has some very significant costs on the municipality in terms of providing for parking and commercial businesses, not to mention the environmental impact. So to me, I think this is a good way forward. It's balanced, it's reasonable, allows for growth, but it allows us to shape it in a community values-based approach. So I'll be supporting that move.
Thank you. Councillor Chappelle and Councillor Kent on deck.
Thank you. My fellow councillors have brought up some amazing points, and I agree with most of them. I think staff has done an amazing job at forming and shaping this OCP with an incredible amount of public input. I don't think we had as substantial and robust public engagement as I would have liked. I took place in the original, around 2000, and I ran for council in 2011 on adopting the OCP that I had engaged with. So it took a really long time to adopt that OCP because there was so much community input. And waiting that long, we did a growth management plan. And it's not for supply and demand that I oppose the growth boundary. It's because of climate implications and building within areas that are greenway corridors and blueways, and building in areas that are floodways and hazard ways. And we use infrastructure and water and sewer as an excuse not to build on bench lands. And we've decided to call these lands the Chima lands and attached a name to them, which has made us incredibly biased. And so one person, whether they be the owner or not, I look at those lands not as the Chima lands or somebody's name on those lands. I look at those lands as gravel benches that should have been built on, and we're actually in our growth strategy management plan in 2005 was recommended that these areas satisfy the criteria for desired urban growth locations as the current capacity of the OCP is insufficient to accommodate the projected population growth. And a moment of pause that Councillor Ray spoke about, we haven't paused. We've pretty much rezoned every piece of land, and we've taken employment land out of our OCP. And now by directing our density and our growth into the lower areas, we are now forcing ourselves to rezone employment land and making people commute. So none of these strategies really work for a climate smart community. And it may be smart growth boundaries, but I'm talking about building on gravel benches and not building in sensitive habitat. And we've already entertained greenway rezonings and the sale of the DCR lands downtown. We are having unprecedented growth in sensitive habitat areas because of our growth boundaries. So it's not about supply and demand. It's not about whether I've taken an economic course or not. And I know well that we have not done enough economic balancing or planning to understand the true cost of our infrastructure in areas up top that have infrastructure in them. We have full infrastructure on our bench lands, and we do not have infrastructure in our green areas, and we haven't considering building in our green areas. So for that reason, I'd like to, I don't mind giving third reading and doing aligned looking at the growth boundary. I would like to have that public input. That is the public input that we receive. And if we go to third reading and just adopt without actually respecting the public input that has been given to us, I feel like we're ignoring the community. We had an enormous public meeting, and that was the number one thing that people spoke about. So I feel like we do need one more public meeting, and I don't think it's a lot to ask after years of going through this document and taking in public input, and one more public meeting to discuss growth boundaries and to really understand, because I am open to changing that opinion, but none of these arguments about saying it's about supply and demand, but really saying that it's about offending the OCP. That's what this is about to me, is that you're taking two lands that should be built on and should accommodate growth and can accommodate growth with economic modeling of infrastructure, and you're dumping all the growth into an area of high climate sensitivity and force us into protecting an enormous amount of people on the Chikai fan with the Chikai debris flow. We have an enormous amount of cost. With diking and protection, we have an enormous amount of cost. We're having to build up on a piece of land that can liquefy. So and we're in, like, when you build on granite, it's solid. So we could build a neighborhood that's completely walkable, that's access to transit, but we could build up a little bit higher. We have lots of benchlands, and this entire growth management strategy recommended building on our benchlands as a part of a smart, sustainable population growth. And it didn't, and it said to preserve the greenways and blueway corridors, and right now we're not doing that. So I wonder about, I hear everybody speaking about supply and demand, but it's not about supply and demand, it's really about climate sensitivity and building in the appropriate areas for growth. I'm supporting, I'm having trouble understanding if I can amend and add the changes of the conversation. Or I don't want to vote against this amazing document. But because of public input, I am gonna have to vote against the document because I don't feel like the public has been listened to. I feel like we had 2 public meetings that made a lot of sense. The public spoke really passionately about a lot of different things. And just to respect that input, I think we should have another meeting and not just go to 3rd reading because we're all exhausted with dealing with, and I know you are exhausted. And I respect the amount of work that's been put in. But the fragmentation of habitat, I just, until we have neighborhood plans, I feel like building on benchlands and having neighborhood plans and working with the community and SORCA and working on lands that are away from climate and not 510 and 509 explicitly, but any benchlands and any benchlands that are adjacent to infrastructure and doing proper infrastructure financial modeling so we know X amount of density will pay for this much infrastructure. And infrastructure lasts 100 years now. We talk about infrastructure like we're building in the 50s, but we have technology and just using smart technology and pumping systems now is not as onerous on infrastructure as it was in the past. Our piping lasts equal amount of time as our housing. And it's easy to figure out now, and it's actually easier building on benchlands than it is on swamplands because you don't have to go down as steep. So the whole sentiment I agree with. And if we lived in a different area like Ontario where you have to maintain growth because everything is buildable, I would agree with a growth boundary. But we don't. We live in the mountains and on an ocean. And that is completely different than a containment boundary that is an urban growth containment boundary. We're not urban growth containment. We're a rural mountain town that is densifying the heck out of sensitive climate areas. Also on brownfields, which I totally support. But it's, when I look at where our growth is going now and the disconnectedness of it all, I think it's, when you have a push for development, you have to build up. You can't build low. So I will most likely vote against Councillor Race's motion.
It's council's motion.
Council's motion, and then Council Race put forward a motion and put forward the minor amendments.
Councillor Kent and Councillor Farhanda.
Well, doesn't leave a lot to be said. I'm angry at Councillor Race had the temerity to take all the words out of my mouth, even with only ditto. I support the motion.
Councillor Farr.
Thank you. Boy, where do I begin? Can you bring up the precursors just for the heck of it? So, the population threshold, supply and demand. One thing I like what Susan said there was the employment lands. One thing about having that boundary and not allowing us to spread out a little bit, we are building on our employment lands. So, and that was a good point. I'm just going to go back and talk about 509 and 510 and population threshold. And the reason I like the one that I was told by staff was where we adopt this one And when it comes back, we're on second reading on some of the major amendments, which is population cap and some of these precursors. Because, like Councilor Ray said, the last OCP, or the Gross Management Plan name, he was supporting these lands into the development world because all the other guys around there had them, university lands, and Bob Fass was doing some. And anyway, these lands were excluded. But I fought really hard because in our growth strategy it said, don't go into those lands. And I thought, we just spent $100,000 on a growth strategy. They tell us not to go into these lands until we have a population of 22,000. So I fought really hard, managed to bring a few over, and we decided not to go into those lands. And since then, with big building booms come on, and you talk about supply and demand. Well, there's two schools of thought. Obviously, sometimes it's supply and demand is you build more, it gets cheaper. It's true. It does get cheaper. And there's different, you get more single family. So anyway, then we get into this, and council has discussed this a few times, obviously. And you can see how easy it is being a councillor. But then we have our public open houses, 2 nights of public open houses. And this is where we're supposed to listen to the people. And I gotta say, and I'm sure nobody was paid to go there and say anything, but 5, 9, and 5, 10 were the #1 talked about parcels of land in the whole OCP. As far as I'm concerned, they took over the OCP. I mean, it was nice to get our habitat protected, it was nice to get safe routes to school, it was nice to get all those things that are in our OCP, that I really think that's where I give a bravo to our staff. All those nice little details that are going to run our town and help turn it into something fabulous. But as far as I was concerned, those 2 public meetings, the mass majority of the people coming out were saying, we would like to be able to utilize these lands, whether it be for trails or let the guy develop them. And I heard that loud and clear. I mean, I don't know if you guys were there or not, but to me that was loud and clear. And that's the people speaking. So I'm happily supporting 3rd reading. I think the vast majority of this document is fabulous and it's perfect. Staff even brought the recommendation for a potential substantial amendment, and they brought this forward because what they heard at that public meeting. And so it says right in there, eliminate phosphorus threshold, because that's what was said. So I don't want to drop this and leave it for a future council. I want to put this to rest with this council. We have been dealing with the OCP for 4 years. Us. We've been talking about it. We've been helping staff, listening to staff. It's us. And to listen to a public meeting where you have 50% of the speakers come out supporting something happening in these lands, for us to say, no, well, we'll go with what we got here. If they want to change it, there's an opportunity for them to change it with the next council. And I say, nope, put her to rest. We will change it. We will take this stuff out. We will discuss these precursors to what is and what isn't. And so when the next council comes along, it's done. Let's not say to them, okay, you guys, have fun with 510 and 509. And that to me doesn't make sense. It was loud and clear in those meetings. Really was loud and clear. So I asked my council to consider not passing the buck on to the next group, and let's just do the right thing and give her 3rd reading. You guys bring us 2nd reading on some of these changes at the same time. It'll all be done by November, and I can say my farewells to you all.
Councillor Blackman.
Yes, I was indeed there for both of those public hearing meetings. I was also there though for a lot of the OCP community engagement meetings. In particular, I remember the kickoff meeting at the Railway Museum, and that was attended by hundreds of people. And that was really kind of a blue sky, talking about what our community values and those kinds of issues and what people wanted to see. And so to me, while it definitely is the case that public hearing, we need to, I did definitely consider that, and what I heard from the public hearing was that we got a lot more work to do on affordable housing, and I hear that message loud and clear. But we also have to consider the whole process, and I also consider the people who maybe didn't come to that meeting in particular on those 2 nights, but who were part of the process. And we do have, I forget what the exact number was, but I think we reached a pretty significant number of people in town, 800 or 900 at least, something like that, which in OCP planning kind of circles, that's pretty big, that's pretty significant. So I take all of those things into consideration when I'm making that kind of, this kind of decision, and that's why I'm comfortable moving forward without any of these substantive amendments at this time.
Thanks. I'll speak to this. OCPs aren't perfect documents. They are consensus documents. They're driven by the community. This one certainly has pieces that I think maybe could be improved upon, different aspects to be considered. But it was developed by, as Councillor Blackman-Wolf says, 900,000 people. It was fine-tuned and coalesced by our staff, who I think did a remarkable job of taking all that information and creating a document that has vision and I think is quite groundbreaking in BC. I am going to support third reading, but I am open to some sort of sidecar amendment on maybe 1 or 2 pieces within the more major amendment considerations. Not saying I actually support them, but I am open to considering a sidecar on that. One of the reasons why I think it's important for us to approve third reading is there are flood management policies in there. There are DP guidelines, our current DP guidelines. We saw a couple come in just 2 weeks ago. Our current DP guidelines are subpar and out of date. And I think it's really important that we actually adopt those sooner rather than later. So that's why I really think we should move forward with third reading today on this. I think the majority of the document is absolutely excellent. Do I agree with 100% of it? No, but I don't expect anyone in this room agrees with 100% of it. So I'm happy to support third reading. I would like to, if this passes, have a conversation about what a sidecar could look like. And looking for staff to maybe outline that process a little bit more in terms of when we should have feedback into what that sidecar might look like. And council can discuss what might be included in that or what might not be included in that. So if this does pass third reading, I would like to engage council in that conversation. We have Councillor Pryor and Councillor Schell.
Well, just to that, I would rather we do the discussion about the sidecar prior to voting for third reading, because, I really do want to have this put to rest in some form to allow, some movement up there. I mean, when was the road management plan done? 2009? 2005. It was 2005 when this land was put on hold. 2005. And so.
I don't know what land you're talking about.
510 and 509. And so, I want to support third reading for the very reasons that you say, but I don't want to support third reading and then have everyone say, well, we'll skip that. So much for the sidecar. We don't have favor reading. We don't have support for the sidecar. If we have support for the sidecar, I'll support third reading, and everybody, almost everybody. I just can't emphasize how much I want to put that to rest this term.
Thanks, and I would agree with that as well. I'm just reading the recommendations for the last OCB adoption, changing the use of the designation of greenways in the official QD plan instead to parks and ecological reserves and having stronger wording on our greenways so that we're not open to building on our greenways and ecological reserves. In the sidecar plan, having stronger wording for our greenways so that we actually protect them would be incredibly important to me. I think it's, we built our community on the fact that we have greenways and corridors and access to nature, and to not have stronger language that, saying that it's a consensus document and it's a plan, it's one of the strongest plans. It's actually the guiding document for our community with the most community input. And I take our OCP as policy that is extremely meaningful and not easy to change, and shouldn't be just an application to change. So by changing the wording of our ecological reserves from greenways and moving to stronger language, it makes it more difficult for future councils to rezone greenways and corridors and areas that are ecologically sensitive. So it's important to me to have a sidecar as well. I want to lay that to rest. I want not to build on sensitive areas and habitats. And this OCP forces building sensitive habitats. And by laying that to rest and allowing some growth outside our current growth boundaries, or at least having a conversation about it and convincing me otherwise. So that's, and if we move tonight to actually ensure that we had that sidebar conversation at the same time, I would be happy to vote for the third reading with a conversation about the amendments.
Councillor Blackman-Wolf.
My concern is that I think we're running up against some timeline issues, and what I mean by that is if we start parceling out pieces of this to go on, I think we're going to run up against that sort of summer doldrums kind of timeline. Not to mention the fact that there will be a new council elected in the next few months. So I am kind of conscious about leaving it half done or allowing it to go through, because we all know that the reality is July council meetings are not as well attended as regular meetings for all kinds of reasons. So I wouldn't like to see that really for key big elements of very community-wide importance. I don't think that we should be addressing that right now. I mean, this stuff has all been recorded. It's all there. It's not going to disappear. And I can guarantee you that this will probably feature very prominently in the public discourse going over the next year. So I think that, we have gone through a very extensive process, and I think we just need to have the courage to kind of wrap it up, put a bow on it, and, go with what we have, because as was mentioned before, I think in the past in Squamish, we've let those timelines eclipse into infinity. And meanwhile, the problem with that is that we get a bunch of new development applications and we can only apply the things that we've already passed. So if we haven't passed this OCP, all of the new development that's coming in the next 6 months, it's under the old one. And I don't want to see us delay that. So I really think that at this point in time, I really think we should go forward with third reading and the minor amendments as suggested by staff.
Thank you. Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, thanks. And Jason's actually, absolutely right. We've all gone through this. We're the experienced council on the OCP. And so I wouldn't want it to be missed either. And minor amendments, of course we have to do those, because some of them are just one-word changes, and staff have caught those and brought them forward. And so I agree, they have to be done, but staff has also brought a few major ones forward that the community spoke out to us on. And I think it would be neglect on our part if we backed off on that and then left it for the next council to come along and go, what's an OCP? What is the OCP anyway? I've never heard of an OCP before. And then staff have to say, oh, well, we'll bring you up to speed on the OCP, but not right now. We've got too much work to do. And then the OCP will slowly slip off, and those major amendments will become a toothache, because people will be coming through, and there won't be clarity on it, because we haven't put clarity on it. The ones that are experienced with the OCD and have gone through all the public process, the ones that should be making a decision on it are passing the buck onto potentially 6 new councillors and a new mayor. And that to me is not good business for us to be. It's not good business for us to be dropping that on the next bunch. Finish it.
So, just for clarification purposes, if the council adopts third read, moves for, passes first, third reading, and adoption without a sidecar, council spoken. This is what, so.
I would support that.
Yeah, no, all I'm saying is that council can just adopt this technically and has dealt with the issue. We're not leaving it out there. I think where Councilor Pryor is going is that he would like to have further specific consideration of the potential
of what staff back to us as they feel there's some changes that required.
No, so just to clarify, what staff have outlined are not changes that they think are required. They are articulating some of the major, some of the things that people said that would force either going back to second reading or a sidecar.
Could you explain that?
This is not their recommendation.
No, I'm not saying it's a recommendation, but it's things that you heard loud and clear in the process. The changes the substantial changes that you brought forward were things that you heard loud and clear in the community coming to you, so you brought them forward.
You're putting words in my mouth. Can you just speak to how your report is outlined and?
Okay, just to be clear, the staff report that we brought forward begins with a recommendation for third reading with a set of minor amendments. And then in the staff report, we also articulate the items that would create the need for a substantive amendment that we heard either much discussion around or a lot of input on. So we tried to articulate those because we thought those were important for council to consider because they were heard at the public hearing.
Thank you. Exactly.
And some of the issues many people talk to, and some of the issues one
Well,
person talked to.
that staff brought forward.
No, they were just completely different. They were different from what was presented.
They were big enough that you brought them to us. You heard enough of that noise that you brought it to us.
Some of them are because there was quite a bit of discussion. There are a few that didn't have a lot of people speaking to,
Yeah, precursors and things like that.
but they generated discussion from council, and so we brought those forward as well.
Exactly.
Councilor Schwab.
Thank you. They wouldn't be in an amendment or a recommendation if they weren't, and avoiding the words public feedback was very artful. That was great. But that was public feedback. And whether you think it's appropriate or not, whether you believe in it or not, that public feedback is necessary to actually take into consideration. And there's things that have gotten in this OCP that I have no idea how they got there because I didn't hear them until they showed up in the documents, like brand asset inventory, which it's not in the work plan. I have no idea what it means. There's no scope, there's no scale, and yet that language is in our OCP. So I don't know how that got there. And I don't know who put it there or how who recommended that we have that we require one person to do an entire district-wide asset inventory, but it's not appropriate language and it needs to be taken out as a part of an amendment. So voting on an OCP that, the integral part of the OCP, there's amazing things in the OCP on transportation, on housing, on health, on all of these things. And yet this amassing, none of that can be achieved if you stuff density into a road that's got one entrance and one exit with 30 years of planning to get another exit going in the Ministry of Transportation. So having other areas to build in is so important, and as Councillor Pryor says, it can't be left to another council. It has to be done now, is that we build out of our sensitive habitats. And I just, that fragmentation of thought and that use of language that is incredibly populist language, but doesn't apply to our region. It doesn't apply to this geophysical area. It really is not language. sprawling neighborhoods, and I totally agree with all of that language. But when I look at our physical area, it has to be looked at in isolation of outside noise and not the planning principles that you normally work with because of our extremely sensitive geophysical areas. And to vote for third reading in its entirety tonight, you know, I'm gonna turn it down in its entirety, and I want the sidecar readings because I think that the public has spoken enough that we need to pay attention to that.
I'm wondering, Matt, if you can just go over potential timelines, should we consider a sidecar? Because essentially, adoption, you can vote against adoption too, and first and second reading of if we decide to do a sidecar are coincidental, correct?
Sorry, say that again, I was just looking at the slide.
In the report, it talks about adoption, early June, and potential first and second reading of a sidecar, basically coincidental. So that's the process outlined in the report, potentially, if council goes there.
Sure. Yeah, I can go over this slide, which has timeline. May I just respond to
Please do.
no comments first? I do want to highlight that I was not trying to avoid the term public feedback. I certainly recognize the substantive elements that we incorporated into the staff report was to reflect the public input. I was just trying to characterize why particular items were in there, because there were many things that were commented on and that we didn't make it in there. We tried to pick the ones that we thought had much comment or generated discussion. So I'm not trying to avoid the term public feedback for sure. And also I did want to say the brand asset inventory, it was a comment that came from a council meeting that we incorporated, from one of the workshops. It did come from a workshop and it was incorporated to the policy following a workshop.
Okay, but I always thought that anything had to go to public, and it sort of snuck its way in at a workshop, and then I didn't vote. We had a vote on all 6 precursors, and it was never laid out what brand asset meant. I don't think it was ever really fleshed out, and yet it ended up as a major policy, a requirement for anybody, and almost impossible to achieve because our brand assets are not municipal owned. They're actually provincially owned. So now we're doing brand asset on provincial assets. So not, we've got 5 provincial parks. Most of our trails run in provincial parks. If we actually did a brand asset, we'd have to include maybe, the border trail and, go into federal waterways. And that is like, it's a crazy requirement. So in bringing it back, I respect Councillor Blackmill's comments about July and June, and that it's going to come back in June anyways. So if we did the amendments and had it back in June, that would be exactly the same timeline, basically. And if it's 2 months or 1 month, and the people that are engaged will give their comments, I'm sure, well before that. It's about, creating the public process is not the same as leaving it until July and asking people their opinions. If there are amendments, we can get them to the public well in advance of the summer. I think that's respectful to do. I completely agree with those comments. I don't think you have to leave it in the middle of the summer and then show up at the council meeting and say, hey, these are our amendments. I think that there's these amendments, as Councillor Pryor has been saying, have been on the table for a long time and in the public for a long time. And to have a little bit more public feedback and allow council to think about the fact that the feedback is given for a reason, I think it's respectful to do.
I'm going to ask council to wrap up comments because I think we're talking in circles a bit now. Councillor Blackmore.
Yeah, I mean, my evaluation of all of the substantive OCP amendments, they're specifically all different riffs off the same theme, which is, do you support a growth pantry? Yes or no? And I don't support, kicking the ball down the road. I don't know if we're going to have a very big change in terms of consensus on council on this. So I just don't see the merits of moving this all forward because A, B, C, D is a very particular property, but I mean, again, that's a rezoning
Yeah, well, just do that. You know, a lot of the precursors and all those things, I mean, I can see, you know, that we're not going to do all of that. Eliminate the population threshold of 22.5 to consider development applications for future residential neighborhoods which provide extraordinary community benefit. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay? I mean, that's all it would take. That's the only one it would take. I mean, all the other stuff, sure, we can leave all the other stuff. I mean, it's an OCP, and 6 months from now, that group will be talking about OCP amendments. I mean, because that's just what, that's the animal. I mean, we'll be amending the OCP. But that would put that to rest, in my opinion.
Matt, maybe I'll just have you quickly go over the two options. I guess there's three options. One is just simply pass third reading. But two options should council want to consider one or all of major amendments that would be necessary.
Yeah, okay. So should council decide to choose to incorporate some substantive changes, there are two options. One is tonight, you could rescind the second reading, specifically identify which major amendments you would like to have made, and direct us to bring back the bylaw for second reading. So that we would have that direction tonight. So give it second reading, direct us to do specific amendments, and set the public hearing date. We've identified a public hearing date that could be made. So we could tonight say, these are the changes to be made, public hearing on May 8th. May 8th, we would have the public hearing, and then in mid-May, we could give it third reading. It would then have to go to the Squamish Regional District. The regional context statement would go to the Squamish Regional District, and the meeting we could hit would be June 27th. And then that would allow us to do adoption in mid-July. Now, the one thing with this option is that everything has to happen in a very tight timeline, including sorting out everything for the public hearing tonight. We would want to have all the language clarified tonight as to what is going to public hearing. So that's
so we would have to reread second reading tonight.
We would do second reading
with those exact changes.
Yeah.
Okay, the other option.
Oh yeah, sorry, and I should highlight, we have also identified that we do have enough flexibility to bring it back on the 24th. If we had a contingency, if we couldn't sort out things tonight, we could come back next week. Actually, we have 1 week where we come back on the 24th and still hit the public hearing with our notification requirements on May 8th. So we have a little bit of flexibility built in. Was there another question? I'm sorry.
Maybe just outline
option two. The other option is to provide the current OCP as drafted with third reading tonight. The RCS, the context statement, would go to the SLRD, and on May 23rd they would consider it. If it came back accepted, which we expected it would, then in early June, the OCP could be adopted, and at that time, we could bring forward the bylaw, which would have substantive amendments that hopefully we could identify much of the direction tonight. If we needed more time, we could discuss at a future meeting what that substantive amendment would be, and it would come to council in early June when the OCP was adopted. And then early June, we would do first and second reading of those substantive amendments. A public hearing could happen in late June, and third reading and an adoption could happen by mid-July. Does that clarify or answer that question?
Does that clarify things, kind of?
Yeah, it's clear as well for me. What do you guys want to do? I mean, what's the one that?
We recommend third reading.
Yes, I kind of do too.
These are just options if council wants to make substantive changes.
But one is to rescind and not give you a third option, or a third reading.
I think if the council pursues option one, which is to go back to second reading, I think it would be most productive if we could have a week between now and then, so that we could get some direction maybe tonight from council and then actually draft an amendment
So that's the best way to go.
No.
No, we recommend just giving third reading.
Okay,
the
yeah,
way
so
the
that's the
bylaw
best
is,
way to go.
with the minor amendments.
Well, just to clarify, we haven't identified
Yeah.
one of these that we have preference for. There are some real trade-offs with
Yeah.
these two. We really identified, our recommendation is adoption of third and
Okay,
with minor
so
amendments.
that's good.
Here, if you have a choice, we haven't identified a preference between these two. We've just tried to give you the pros and cons of these two different options. Both are viable, but there are some pros and cons on both sides.
And you want to pick one?
No, it's for council to
I'm
choose,
trying to-
Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I mean, they're our staff, right? I mean, they're the
They made a
ones that have to do
recommendation.
this.
They've made a recommendation, Councillor Carter.
And so you want third reading, that's right.
They're recommending third reading with minor amendments, which is the motion on the floor right now.
There it is.
Yeah, yeah, no, well, can I just say that I'm happy with third reading. I'm happy if we take A in the potential substantial OCP amendments and have A come through when we give our third reading and come back to council. So A is in second reading for us to take that clause and make that law.
Can you clarify what you mean by A?
Delete policy requiring district's population to have
Thank you.
reached the 22.5 prior to consideration development applications for future residential neighborhood land which provides extraordinary community benefit. Okay, so if the land is gonna give us an extraordinary community benefit, the population cap of 22.5 is not there.
Councillor Elliott.
So, the motion on the floor is third reading with minor amendments. That's kind of what I think we should be voting on. We've had lots of debate. If other councils want to put forward another motion around future amendments, I'm not sure why we're muddying the waters with the motion that's on the floor. We have a procedural bylaw, we've all spoken to it. So I'm confused why we keep going back to these. These aren't related to the motion.
There was a question put forward by two councillors that the bearing on how they might vote through reading has a bearing on whether or not there's discussion, debate, and perhaps consideration of some sort of sidecar. And so I wanted to allow that conversation to happen. Councillors know the tools at hand to move something forward if they so choose. But I wanted to allow that space for council to explore the thought of the sidecar while this motion is on the floor, because it has a bearing on council's decision whether or not they consider third reading or not. Councillor Shaw, please.
So option two, I'd like a friendly amendment from the mover to move to option two, to adopt an amendment, which brings us to the exact same sort of timeline, and is not, it's got strengths and the risks are very few, because if you look at the risks, perception of immediately amended, and you're doing that next week anyways, so, it's, it just sort of, but it's, a friendly amendment so that you get consensus. The idea of consensus for an OCP is incredibly important, and you're going to lose consensus because you don't want to discuss amendment before.
I don't agree on that.
It's not a friendly amendment. You have to put it on the floor. What's the amendment?
The amendment is that we move to option two, that we adopt an amendment.
So, I'm just trying to articulate, that's a completely new motion. So you're saying that the amendment is that upon third reading, a sidecar amendment be considered as well. I'm just trying to, because your wording would not be an amendment at all, would it, Robin?
No, that sidecar be added to the third reading.
Saying what?
That give third reading bylaw, no, because yours are minor amendments. Direct statute and initiate work on amending bylaws or bylaw 500.
May I suggest, council has a choice to vote against adoption whenever it comes back. You can choose, council can choose to vote for or against third reading. I'm going to suggest we vote on what's on the floor. Council wants to put forward a separate motion on what a sidecar might look like. We'll do that, and if it doesn't meet certain councillors' expectations, they can vote against adoption down the road.
So
support it this time, I got it. Next time I don't, because we don't.
If the sidecar doesn't meet your expectations, you can vote against the bylaw. Oh, you can vote against third reading too. Absolutely up to council's individual discretion.
Well,
I'm gonna call the question.
can I just speak to it just a bit? Well, the sidecar motion doesn't come till after we vote on it.
That's what I'm suggesting, because I think it would just be a little too confusing.
So I'm gonna support third reading, and I'm gonna bring a sidecar motion forward afterward.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle opposes. Motion carries.
Okay.
You repeat the motion, please?
The motion is to give it third reading with minor amendments.
So that's the OCP with the minor amendments, none of the major ones. So then the sidecar motion would be that when the OCP comes back to us next time, the elimination of A, potential substantial OCP amendments, whatever A on page,
Councillor Barr, can I help guide you a little bit here?
yeah,
There's a motion, up there it says, so we've done the first one.
yeah.
You can add a motion that says that staff, direct staff to initiate work on amending bylaw to address the following substantive items, and then you can list them.
Okay, well, that's what I want with A, elimination of population thresholds. So, it's all, no, just that,
25.
yeah.
You have to be really clear.
Yeah,
There's
well,
two
A,
different-
I'm trying to be clear. A and it's called elimination of population.
A includes elimination of 34,000 and 2,200, 500, 20,500. You need to be
A,
clear.
the 22.5.
22,500.
Yeah, and so in speaking to that, I just feel as this is quite.
It's not seconded.
Oh, if someone would second that.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Chappelle?
Anyway, I mean, I did support third reading, so it shows I'm a team player. And I just, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier about downloading this onto a future council, all those things, I'm hoping that council will support this just to put that one area at rest. And so I'll just let the cards lay where they may.
I'm open to a sidecar to consider the withdrawal of 22,500. I always thought it was a bit of a false benchmark anyway, because I think the policy precursors will end up getting us there anyway. So I'm not necessarily married to that 22,500 threshold, and I'm open to considering its removal. The only other piece, and it's not in the motion as it is, the only other piece that I would like more clarity on is the brand asset inventory, to really understand that, because I do think it's an ambiguous definition or concept. And I think we thought maybe in that time it takes to get 22,500, we would start to flesh that out a little bit more. I think I know the intent of it. I think the intent is to make sure that if we're going to develop outside our growth management boundary, we ensure that trails and ecosystems and all those things are clearly fleshed out, so we don't ruin what we're trying to preserve. I wouldn't have supported taking the 34,000 threshold off, because I think that's actually the thing that forces the extraordinary benefit in these lands. And if we take that threshold out, we would actually lose the leverage to really create one-of-a-kind opportunities on any lands outside of the growth management boundary. So I wouldn't have supported that. But the 22,500 has always been a bit of a confusing benchmark for me. I'm not saying I would vote for it or against it this time, but I am open to including that in a sidecar amendment. Councillor Chappelle.
I agree with all of that. Those are the two, those are the two policies that irk me the most. And I guess I'm the outlier and the not team player. But I also, it bothers me when people laugh at other councillors making motions or speaking. So, but, you know, I really hope that you guys would respect other councillors' opinions. And, yeah, I totally agree with you, Mayor Hanson.
Councillor Blackman, Wilson, Councillor Craig.
Absolutely respect all my councillors, fellow councillors' opinions. Don't always agree.
Councillor Brown.
I just wondered if the mayor would like to revise that motion to add the precursors on the, what you just talked about there.
The brand asset
Yeah.
precursor?
Yeah, and put that on so that would be the two things on that motion would be 22.5 and the precursors for that brand.
You made the motion, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, well, I'm happy with that.
There's, should we have a motion to amend that, or is it okay to do it friendly? Okay, so the motion is that a sidecar staff initiate work on amending a bylaw to address the following. One is consider the 22,500 threshold in the growth management policies, and two, consider removing or amending or defining the brand asset precursor. Is that fair enough? Is that clear enough?
Mayor, through you, just that second piece around the brand asset inventory, those are quite distinct alternatives in terms of removing versus amending or further defining. So I think we're looking for some clarity from council. Is it that it's in principle it's supported but needs to be further defined if you're at a point where you can actually clarify that, or is it to further explore or to options around the
certainly
brand
from my
asset?
understanding, I'd like to understand exactly what it is a little bit more and how we expect that work to be done and who would do it, to really understand if it's a reasonable precursor or not. I just find it's not, so that's for me. I don't necessarily want to put out, that's just my perspective. Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Lee.
Thanks. The fact that it's not defined at all, and we even have to add that, or ask if it's gonna be amended when we don't know what it is, I'd like it just removed, really, from, and if somebody at a later date finds some reason to do an extensive study again, to figure out what our assets are, I'm happy to explore that in the future. I just don't think it should be exclusively.
So, perhaps, maybe we'll split out the various things and vote on them separately, just because I think we're not going to get to it.
I'm happy to have a conversation about it. I'm happy to, I'm happy to explore it, and if it's in as however it gets put in, and it gets explored, and however you want to spend your time, I'm happy however it goes. I'll vote for, just as long as there's discussion and the sidecar, so we get the ability to actually decide on something that's viable or not viable.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott and Councillor Race and Councillor Blackman.
If the motion on the floor is to keep them combined, then I'll be voting against it. I think they're vastly different things. One absolutely affects our growth management policies. I'm not going to vote against. Amending that in the USP, which we just gave third reading to, and the other is a definition. And that policy precursor has been sitting in the document since December. I've received good feedback in the community about that because we put so much work into our brand. People do feel that they can situate their business here because Squamish is Squamish as it is today. It has a certain reputation. But it's different than amending a population threshold. So I wouldn't support the motion as it stands with both of them sitting there.
We can sever them up. Councillor Race.
Thank you. So, yeah, if it's for both of them, I'm going to vote against it. I'd probably vote against either one of them. But the 22.5, I gave reasons before when I was speaking about why I thought that was appropriate. And the problem I see with taking it out is that invites somebody, the landowner, to come in tomorrow and start an application. The problem with that is we don't have the policy precursors in place, and I think that's a very, very important part of this process. And so now we're planning a subdivision or development without that policy in place, You could just guess about the policy, but it may not turn out that way. And I don't think it's actually to the benefit of the property owner or staff to kind of go down a road and then find out we're actually going to end up in a different place. And the property owner then has to kind of reel back, start again, spend more money, and come back in under the new policy. So I'm not sure that that's a good idea. So I would vote against that one. The brand asset management, I can remember at a committee meeting asking staff exactly what that was about. And what I took away from that was that what we had to do was just have a little bit of clarity about the scope of that. Because when you start talking about brand asset, you can spend 10 years trying to answer that question when you're talking about management of that and how extensive is it and are you identifying every single climbing route and so forth. But I think it was an idea was just to kind of put a circle around what the scope of that was, and we might need a little bit more clarity about that. And I'm not sure if this motion actually does that, so I would not be supporting this motion.
Councillor Buckman.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm not in favor of either of those sections, and in particular, I'm concerned about the 22.5. If we remove that while also adding in the 34,000, I mean, who's to say that, you know, we're not going to get 6 major development applications in right away in all the future residential neighborhood areas. So, to me, that just doesn't really make sense to me, and I think staff, you know, there's some work that still needs to be done after the OCP that can get done within a reasonable time frame, and it's better for all involved that work be done first rather than having an application in front of us or in front of staff.
Can I just ask council staff to clarify? There's policy precursors, and I don't think there's any talk about taking any of them out except perhaps defining one better. Just sort of alluding to what Councillor Blackman-Wolf said about we could have a whole bunch of applications in tomorrow. If the policies haven't been done, we still wouldn't be considering developments until the policies are done, correct?
Mayor, through you, that's correct. As the policy in the OCP at third reading currently states, those policy precursors need to be completed prior to considering future development on those future residential neighborhood lands under an extraordinary benefit scenario.
And can you just outline one more thing? I still got Councillor Chappelle. With regard to extraordinary community benefit, I just want to make sure everyone's clear that is that a process in and of itself? So landowner A comes and says, I'm outside the growth management boundary, however, I am going to provide extraordinary community benefit so that you can just simply open the door to considering my application. So they would approve that first, or is it part of simply an application?
So there is policy in the growth management section that sets up the process for evaluating the proposal of an extraordinary benefit. If an application comes forward in a future residential neighborhood outside the growth management boundary, the policy states that the first piece of the consideration process is council considering whether that extraordinary benefit is indeed an extraordinary benefit, and if it is determined to be an extraordinary benefit, the application proceeds from that consideration of the application.
It doesn't determine an outcome, it just allows the application to proceed. Councillor Chappelle and Councillor Park.
Thanks. You know, I appreciate most of the precursors. You know, the development of infrastructure below a certain amount, the fire planning. There's a lot of really great things in the precursors, but having arbitrary precursors like brand asset, and it's not that a whole bunch of people did amazing work on brand. I totally appreciate that was done, and we have a really nice logo, and we are a really amazing brand. But you know what? People in the 1970s came here because of our brand, and we didn't need an entire policy piece to understand that this place is spectacular and extraordinary. But having arbitrary and poorly worded policy that actually has no policy behind it, like a brand asset is necessary to be completed. And really, if you I came here to climb, I came here to mountain bike, I came here to practice all those brands. I didn't need somebody to tell me that that was an extraordinary benefit. And I'm sure everybody in this room has felt the exact same way. And by somebody doing an asset inventory, it changes nothing. It doesn't change our asset. And understanding our assets, we protect it by showing up for our OCP meetings and saying what we want, and respecting public language in documents. So adding language like that that's prohibitive to people coming in and developing what could be extraordinary benefits. The infrastructure pieces are separate from that. It's that one piece that has no real meaning to it. And we've done brand asset management through having a brand and signage and pointing people towards our assets, and it's caused insane growth here. That's what brand asset has done. It's made our, you know, Instagram is our brand asset. We're global with our brand right now because we have an extraordinary place to live. And most of this OCP is extraordinary as well. It really defines our assets. It lays in amazing active transportation. You guys have done a spectacular job. And then there's these like arbitrary pieces that are put onto specific properties. And as a person that is really, I love policy. I went and did an MBA because I love policy and finance now. That's an extraordinary benefit for me. And when I look at this document and think about arbitrary building or arbitrary policy, I want it to be as clear as possible so that when people come, they're not arbitrarily coming to a six-person council and the mayor and saying, you know, am I extraordinary? Does this provide benefits? And, you know, and meanwhile, we are zoning outside our OCP. So it just, you know, those hypocrisies, I would say, really irritate me. And I, you know, I'm hoping that council will drop their biases a little bit and vote to have the conversation, because this is really all it is. It's saying that we're going to allow the community a little more conversation on these unclear bits. It's not saying we don't love the OCP. It's saying there's a little bit of clarity needed, and we're taking a month more to really sort that out and make sure that everybody's comfortable. Because having an OCP where people vote against it, that's an entire population of Squamish, of people that voted for me, that voted for Councillor Pryor, you know, that are not agreeing. So I would love consensus on this OCP. And I think we can get there. I just think that we need a little bit more conversation with the things that were brought forward by the public.
Councillor Pryor, I saw your hand, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sever, we'll vote on 25 and we'll vote on the one policy, or clarifying that policy, that one policy.
Okay, well, my motion, so I'll second that, I guess.
I think the chair just severed them into.
Anyway, you know, to Councilor Ray's point, I think that was great, what staff just said about extraordinary benefits, so that means that there won't be a rush of people coming in to develop unless there's an extraordinary benefit to the community, like, oh yeah, we're going to bring in a huge tech center, we want to put right on top of this money, 2,400 jobs. That'd be extraordinary. I'd love it that came in. I mean, if extraordinary things are coming in, welcome them. So I'm not worried about rash on the 22 cap. So I think it just makes more sense to me now than it did before you answered the previous questions here on that. It makes more sense to me now to eliminate 22.5. Okay.
Point of clarification from staff. My understanding of the growth management boundary is that it only applies to residential neighborhoods. It does not apply necessarily to other uses. Is that correct?
And just another point of clarity for Councillor Blackman-Wolf. So there's distinct things that we're talking about. There's the population threshold, which is distinct from the growth management boundary policy as well. And I just, in following the conversation, I want to be really, really clear that everybody has the same understanding of the policy as it's in the bylaw related to 22.5 and how it interacts with the policy precursors. So I'm just gonna, if council's okay with this, I'm just gonna actually read the policy just to be crystal clear, because I'm concerned that maybe there's not total clarity. So in, this is policy 9.2F within the growth management section, which says that despite 9.2A and 9.2C, and these are policies related to the growth management boundary, the policy states, consider residential neighborhood development in a portion of future residential neighborhood parcels located adjacent to existing developed neighborhoods once the district's population has reached 22.5, as identified by either annual population estimate, provincial population estimate, or the federal census, provided the following criteria are met. 1, the development proposal provides extraordinary community benefits, and 2, council has adopted the policies that address all items identified in 22H, and that's the whole suite of policy precursors. So for Councillor Pryor, just wanted to make sure that linkage was still understood. So with the motion to eliminate the 22.5, that influences, so as Councillor Race identified, a policy, an application could be made, but those policy precursors we're going to have to sort out because they're still linked to that 22.5.
So an application may be made, but until the precursors are looked after, it's just a paper sitting on your desk, right? All I'm saying is, it at least puts the ball in the court for 5.9 and 5.10 to start something. It's only really 5.9 and 5.10 who have been held up since 2005 or 2009 when the growth management plan was adopted. So that's all. That's what I'm just trying to kick the ball over the fence, get that process started, and then the next council can deal with all the precursors and all that stuff they can deal with, and then we'll just have to kick the ball along a little farther. We don't have to deal with a big OCP amendment.
Julie, did you? Yep. So I know, just for a point of clarity, I know you set up in the motions. Which one are we dealing with first? I don't know which one to comment on.
You can comment on both, and we'll do the 22,500 first.
Okay, so on the 22,500, I would vote against this sidecar amendment. I think that our community was pretty clear throughout the whole process that they wanted us to manage growth. As they recognize that the community is going to get bigger, they want us to preserve that small town feel and manage that growth wisely. I think when I think about eliminating that, my fear is that we will get a proposal in the short term. And the fact of the matter is that once the OCP is approved, we have a huge piece of work to do in terms of amending our zoning bylaw to now align with the OCP. We have major pieces of policy that we need our staff working on right now around green the subdivision and control bylaw and other pieces that we know are on our priority list over the coming months to really just deal with the growth we have in our current developable areas. And so I think it's really important to give this community a space to breathe, to put the right policies in place. It's not a long pause. And we know, because we get OCP amendments quite frequently, that serious developers who put the time and effort in bring forward amendments to the OCP. We're seeing that right now in another part of the community. And there's nothing that stops a developer at any time from doing that. But we need a little bit of space to put some fundamental policies in place so we're not trying to play catch up while also looking at applications. I don't think this is an unreasonable request. I believe it still leaves the door open. And I think it's what our community has asked us to do all the way through the
just need you to clarify one piece. I don't think anyone's suggesting we take out 9.2H, which are policy precursors. So they would still be in there, even if the 22,500 came out. We wouldn't consider a development application until those policy precursors were in place, correct?
Correct. And
So-
firstly, that that there's the extraordinary benefit piece.
That's one of them, yeah. Okay. Before I call the question on the first part of the motion, I think we kicked this one about. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillors Black and Wolf, Elliott, Kent, and Race opposed. Motion fails. Second part of the motion was further refinement of the brand asset inventory precursor. That's still on the floor. Would anyone like to speak to it?
Well, I'd like to see a little bit of a review of that, for sure.
Okay. Yep.
I don't support the CP amendment around this. I mean, we have things in our strategic plan over the last 4 years, like real estate, and facilities strategy, and the scope of that was determined as we brought that piece of work forward. I think what's in our document, this is a high-level guiding document, and I think the scope and how we determine what is reasonable for our community to undertake, and the timeline in which we want to do it. I don't think anybody on this council wants to see us drag out these policy precursors. Most of them are already underway. So I think that's a scoping issue of council, and I'm happy to see that come to the community development committee, but it is not a reason in my mind to amend those. This is the highest level document, and we get more and more clarity as we pull things out of it and deal with it on a one-off basis. So to me, this doesn't need a bar at all.
And as Councillor Elliott, just to be clear, we would deal with this at a policy level anyway, and we would define it through that process. Councillor Shaw.
That's awesome, except it's not a policy. It doesn't even say anything. There's nowhere you can find it. If you Google that, it doesn't come up anywhere. It doesn't exist. There's no policy. So to say it's being removed from the OCD because it's a policy that's been worked on or gone to the public or had any thought put into it whatsoever, except for we have a brand, they have to do an asset inventory. I don't even know who said that out loud and how it ended up in here. Because it certainly didn't go to the public. Nobody I know knows what that is. So when you have something that is that arbitrary end up in your OCP, it is deeply concerning to me. I don't know how it ended up in there. So arbitrary policy in our OCP needs to be at least discussed. And so voting against this because we just don't want to have a discussion on it is, I find that disrespectful to the public because the public doesn't have any idea. It came to a council meeting in an afternoon one day and we haven't had a robust discussion on it. Nobody knows what it means and it really affects our growth. It's in one of the 6 precursors to a bunch of developers actually being able to build on their land or put forward an application even. And it's not even being worked on because nobody knows what it means. And we've got a lot of things to work on, like the zoning bylaws. I totally agree with that, which is why this needs to be pulled out. Because it's arbitrary, because there's no wording around it, and because we have zoning bylaws to actually work on to integrate with this OCD, and that's huge. So this seems like a small thing to make it amenable to other people. And there should be some compromise by this council. And the whole, we need to pause is, yeah, we need to pause, but we haven't paused. We've built and rezoned every piece of land in this district. So, and we're rezoning our green space, and we're rezoning our seniors land, and we go on and on with our rezonings. And we have an immense, it's like 10,000 houses on the books.
Can you stick to the
That is the whole idea that we're pausing, and that
we're on the
this is
brand
going to cause
asset.
pause, on the brand asset management, that it's going to cause a pause or cause people to actually, I don't know how that achieves any of those things, like pausing, or it doesn't cause pause, it just causes people to go, what is that policy and how can I achieve it? And we won't have anything in place, even after we reach 22, which is we're already at 20, we'll be at 20, we're probably already at 22. And then people have to go through a brand asset management and we won't have a policy then.
So I'm just going to read exactly what it says. It says it's very clear on what the brand asset is. What it isn't clear on is what Councillor Elliott spoke to, which is the scope. Is it the entire district? Is it just on one piece of land? And those can be defined through the policy development. Brand asset inventory, identifying specific recreational and connectivity values of all trails and key recreational assets within the district. That's pretty clear, but I think what is not clear, or what isn't defined yet, is does that have to be done through the whole entire district before we consider it, or is that on a parcel by parcel basis before it can be considered? And that's the scoping piece that I think will be defined through policy, is what Councillor Elliott is saying.
Can I?
Yep, go ahead.
So if it said define the connectivity between neighborhoods and how your piece of, how your parcel of land is going to contribute to the active transportation plan and connect neighborhoods, and actually not ask for every trail and every climb to be inventory, which isn't in our district. It's not in our district. Our brand is in provincial parks. So are we branding provincial parks? Are we branding stuff that's in our district, which we don't have much in our district? We have we just have residential. We don't even have work in our boundaries anymore. We all commute south. So doing our brand asset inventory on something specific, like do we have are you going to add cycling trails? Are you going to add, how are you going to add to our brand asset is different than a brand asset inventory. I would accept that, even like how we're going to add to our brand asset inventory. But it's not. It's very arbitrary. It's asking for listing items that are not in our district.
Matt, Sarah, did you want to? I saw your hand.
Yeah, I would like to provide some clarity just for council and the community too about the sort of the context and the genesis of this policy precursor, very simply, and the evolution of how we got it here. And I think some of the key pieces around what was kind of the spirit of the intentions behind the policy precursor. So the brand asset inventory was highlighted as an additional policy precursor at a growth management workshop for the OCP, I believe back in July. There was a lot of discussion around it. As council will recall, we had sort of a progression of 3 growth management discussions. And at the third one, council provided staff direction by motion to include the set of policy precursors, inclusive of the brand asset inventory. And at the time, the conversation was really around inventory, not necessarily like a management plan, but the spirit behind it that staff took away from that council workshop was really to add a more sort of global for Squamish, to look at what those key assets are across the community and the ones that are sort of connector points between large areas of future development. There was discussion about the scope and how far do you go to prescribing exactly what that means. In the simplest, in its like on the surface of it, it is high level. We haven't gone down the rabbit hole to really scope it out because, as Councillor Elliott sort of highlighted, typically when we have sort of policies that are policies in regulatory direction to consider amending a zoning bylaw or develop further policy, that gets ironed out and worked out through staff work planning. So once it's resourced, so there is an opportunity to do that further. But given the focus on what this means, certainly if it's council's desire to go a little bit further to scope it out so there's a little bit more clarity, staff are happy to consider that council's direction. But the other side of it is that it gives a lot of flexibility around defining that once we get to that point. If the 22.5 still stands, we have a little bit of time to work through that. So I hope that provides a little bit more context.
Councillor Elliott, and I'm hoping you can call the question on.
No, thank you. I just wanted to ask that clarify if there's nothing arbitrary about any of these policy precursors. We voted on them each individually as we went through the process, so I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call a question, and this is about bringing back an amendment to the OCP that would further refine that particular precursor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Black and Wolf, Elliott, Kent, Race, and Heitzman opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Why don't we take a 2-minute, 3-minute recess? All right? Thank you. Thank you. We are back, and we are on 10A1, correspondence for action. There's a letter from Ms. McBride, re-hospital parking, and there's a recommended motion that we refer this to staff for consideration and response. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Black-Wolf. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I think this is a good one, and we need to have some good conversation with the hospital and Vancouver Coastal Health on that. There's another letter from Ms. Zabatos with regard to the whistle cessation, and the recommended motion that we refer this to staff for consideration and response. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There is a correspondence from, I can't remember if it's a man or a woman, Croft, regarding officer's dog park at Bailey Street. Refer to staff for consideration. In response, moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Kent. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And there is a motion from Ms. Rosali regarding Brennan Park Pool. The motion is that we receive and refer to staff for consideration and response. Moved by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. There are a number of correspondences for information. I would like to refer the letter from our MP, Pam Goldsmith-Jones, regarding candidate infrastructure plan and funding to staff. I had a brief conversation with our CAO about how we can start to tap into these funds, particularly since they focus on recreation and a couple of things that we haven't been overly aggressive at looking for funding for. So motion to refer that one to staff. Moved by Councillor Blackman-Wolf, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Are there any other correspondences that council would like to pull for consideration separately? I don't see any. There was something, sorry, in the other Goldsmith-Jones letter that I thought was worth referring to staff, particularly around species at risk and rental construction financing initiatives. So I'd like to, and early childhood learning and home care. There's a couple of seniors. There's lots of good stuff in that one too. So I'd like to refer that to relevant staff as well. Moved by Councillor Chappelle. I'll second that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. And someone want to move receipt of the others, unless I see a motion to take something out. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. There is minutes from the regular business meeting of April 3rd, Committee of the Whole April 10th. We didn't do these all as one this time, but that's all right. Move receipt of the regular business meeting minutes of April 3rd. Moved by Councillor Blackman-Wolf, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Move receipt of the Committee of the Whole of April 10th. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a motion that comes out of those minutes that the regular business meeting be corrected on page 9, Squamish Off-Road Cycling Association, by inserting et al. Following circa. We've approved it with those changes. We're good. I'm just a little behind. There's another recommended motion that council adopt the real estate strategy dated April 10th, directed by staff to develop an invitation plan for this strategy. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Smart Cities considerations. There's a recommended motion that we authorize the submission of the application To Infrastructure Canada Smart Cities Challenge for the $10 million prize carry focus on developing a regenerative community, moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Stiles. For sure.
Our finance staff, question on that, do we actually have, the $10 million prize money focusing on developing a regenerative economy? Are we actually putting, was there a prize winner for that, or is that we're going to apply for it and then figure out what that means later?
No, the Linda or Robin, do either of you want to speak to it?
If I understand the question, and I'm not sure.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, Linda Glende, CEO of District of Squamish. I'd actually ask the question repeated just so I don't answer it incorrectly.
There were people that spoke to different things, and most of them were not part of the regenerative economy. Did we pick one person that we're going to apply the money to, or are we just submitting an application and then hoping to receive money in order to invest in one of those project initiatives? Or will the project open up after we receive the money, and will we be accepting more applications for anything that's within a regenerative economy to fund?
Mm-hmm. Mayor Heisman, through you, when I hear the word people, I'm assuming it's the partner presentations that occurred at the community event. The partners, I don't have the list with me now, unfortunately, but the partners that Kate, our Economic Development Officer, Kate Mulligan, had put up in her presentation to get council to narrow down the challenge statement are those partners that she and her staff are currently working with in terms of narrowing down the challenge statement. Once that occurs, and should we be successful in the first stage, which is the $250,000, that money then further goes to work with those partners on coming up with a proposal to apply for the $10 million.
All six of the partners that apply?
At this time, yes, they've all been working together. The idea is a collaborative effort, not picking one certain partner.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I don't think it even precludes bringing on other pieces,
That's exactly.
but the 250 would help us
Explore.
flush out exactly what that looks like, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. Business arising from the minutes, there was, we had a delegation that was speaking to providing free music nights in the park, and the request that came in front of council was actually just for one night, waiving of the, or grant and aid to waive the fees for use of the park and pavilion, and so there's actually more than one night, and so really the grant and aid is for $2,800, am I getting this number correct? $2,843.43 for 7 Sundays, or is it 20? Oh yeah, 7 Sundays. And so in order to do all 7 Sundays, we're waiving up to that amount, considering waiving up to that amount. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Breyer. Councillor Chabelle?
Thanks. You know, I left feeling, I tried to find this person as a producer, and I'm sure he's got a lot of experience, but giving up every Sunday in the park really removes any ability for any other small community group to use the Osan Pavilion. So I'm not in favor of giving up all 7 Sundays for one person to provide events. I would need more than just I would need more of a presentation to understand expertise. I'd like to at least see a resume, and you know, before giving up the Osan Pavilion for every Sunday that's not being used. There was not enough information for me to be able to make a informed decision about this, so I will be voting against this.
Councillor Reyes?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think what I could support is 3 or 4 as a trial, so we kind of get a feel for what this is about, but not to just dedicate the whole summer to them right off the bat.
What I might suggest is we defer this and maybe fine tune this a bit more, get some real information back and understanding about the pros and cons of that. So I will defer this to a committee meeting in the future. Do I need a seconder for deferral? I'll second by Councillor Chappelle. I'm not going to specify the committee, but we'll put it on a committee agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Committee minutes and reports, Community Development Standing Committee, meeting minutes, on April 3rd be received. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Black and Wolf. All those in favor? Were you making fun of me bumbling over my words? Opposed? Motion carries. There's a committee recommendation on building bylaw 1822, amendment bylaw 2587, that council directs staff to implement phase 1 as presented to the committee on April 3rd, part 9 buildings on July 1st, 2018, and phase 2, part 9 buildings on January 1st, 2019. And that step 3, according to the BC Energy Step Code, be implemented for commercial residential buildings in phase 1, and that staff bring back options regarding step code implementation for commercial buildings. Moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Chappelle. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. There is a business license bylaw recommendation. I'm not going to read it out. Is there a mover?
Just say cannabis.
I can say cannabis. It's not just cannabis, but it is cannabis. We'll move the first one. Oh, we'll move the whole thing if everyone's okay with it. Nope. Okay. The first one, I'm going to separate them out. The committee does not support cannabis production as an allowable use in the rail yards and downtown in the zoning bylaw. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Elliott on that one. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. That the Sea to Sky Business Park be included in the zoning bylaw update as an area where cannabis production is allowable use. Moved by Councillor Blackman Wolf, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Elliott opposes. Motion carries. Zoning bylaw amendment, maintain the current 300-meter buffer between schools and dispensaries. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Race. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Blackman Wolf and Chappelle opposed. Motion carries. And that the committee supports adding a buffer around Brennan Park recreation of 300 meters to east and south up to Highway 99 to the west and north.
Can you change where the wording says committee to council? In
Yes,
these two motions?
of course. We are talking about council. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Elliott. You want to speak to that one?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Brenton Park has no commercial anything by it. I don't think that arbitrarily adding a 300-meter zone when we already have said in our business area where we allow and where we don't allow production of marijuana, that this is sort of an arbitrary zoning that could have consequences that we don't really understand yet, and I will be voting against this.
Councillor Elliott?
I'm gonna vote for this. There's already a school near Brennan Park, and as we do our engagement on Brennan Park, we may be looking at partnerships with the school district to locate in that area if they're interested. So I think this is a reasonable ask at this point.
Yeah, I'm happy to support this, even though there isn't any commercial zoning currently applicable. It will make it very clear that should any commercial zoning be considered in the future, that at this point we are implementing a 300-meter buffer. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle and Blackman Wolf opposed. Motion carries. And that the zoning bylaw amendment include restrictions on dispensaries operating in the I-9 zone Sea to Sky Business Park. Didn't we already deal with that? Councillor Blackman Wolf?
I had a question, what is the I-9 zone? Was that just the rail yard, or was it?
No, my name is Jensen, Director of Community Planning. It's a specialized industrial zone, which is in the business park. It's not in the rail yards. And it does allow for some retail use. So I believe the discussion that happened at the last meeting, the committee meeting, was around putting some limitations if a dispensary was to go in there, that there would be some restrictions around it.
So it's saying, the motion before said we're allowing it in the business park. This is saying we're not considering not allowing it in this one particular zone in the business park, and the intention of that is to make sure that we're not, either making things too expensive or disallowing consideration of other industry in the business park.
And there's a distinction. The previous motions are about production, and this one is about
Oh, yes.
dispensaries.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So, that entire area has become a bit of a pleasure district. We have 13 liquor operators.
I'm not laughing at you.
No, that's okay. You can laugh at pleasure district. I find it funny in other areas too, and we're gonna have a 3-story tower there, and it's gonna have a giant marijuana leaf on it soon enough, and ice cream and beer. So that's the only thing that really makes it acceptable. And I just find restricting craft industries, I think that the future will be craft industries in this entire area. Did Mr. Buxton have to leave because he was laughing? That's funny. Anyhow, this entire area is going to be part of a walkable, transit-oriented, hopefully transit-oriented district, because it contains so many craft, it will contain an enormous amount of craft beer and probably marijuana dispensaries, and probably growing as well. And those smaller dispensaries are going to be cut out of the economy after the regulations put it in the liquor board anyways. So it'll be interesting to allow those small craft operators in all industries, and I don't see it any different than alcohol, and think it should be allowed in the I-9 district.
Can I clarify?
Yes, please do.
So I don't believe the motion says that there's going to be no dispensers in an I-9 zone. It just says restrictions. So I think where we're going with is treating them kind of like, if you're producing, then you can have some sales in that zone rather than having just pure retail.
Do you think that can I just ask?
Yes.
Jonas, do you think that motion captures that, or should it be rewritten to clarify that? Because that basically restricts, it doesn't really say what the restrictions are.
Well, I just don't think we got that far on the committee meeting, so that will be coming up.
Okay, I will support it then.
Yeah, and when the bylaw comes forward, you.
Wait, I'm gonna listen to Black and Wolf.
Yeah. Councillor Black and Wolf.
I remember now, and I remember this was the one where we thought that the cannabis superstore, kind of like big floor plate kind of thing. So in my mind, if there was one place in the community you were going to have such a use, this is actually a good spot. It's got good highway exposure, destination type of economy. We're in the producing in this district. There's a lot of production happening, so new unique business opportunity. I'm okay with it, so I'm going to oppose this motion. I don't think anybody moved to second it.
Yeah, so I was looking, I'm going, don't remember. Did we move and second this? No? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor. I'm going to support it because I think it's worth considering something on this, although I hear what Councillor Black and Wolf and Councillor Chappelle are saying, and I'm open to that, but I think we may want to put some thought into it a little bit, so I'm going to support the motion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Black and Wolf, Councillor Chappelle opposed, motion carries. Amend C4 zoning. Ooh. Yep. As a stopgap measure, be applied to the entire Bailey Street frontage. Yeah, it's an awkward motion. Do you want to re-articulate that?
So I think this was about extending the C4 changes to include the block that we missed. And then we talked about going around the corner a little bit to Bailey, but I don't think we meant the whole Bailey Street frontage. We meant that one lot that fronted Cleveland.
That's correct.
Okay.
So for that property that does have both frontages, that's the motion it's targeting.
So it should be at the corner of Cleveland and Bailey. Oh, yeah. Something like that. I think be applied to the lot situated at Cleveland and Bailey, whichever is clearest for the address.
Southwest.
So
southwest corner.
How would you like to articulate?
We could say to be applied to the entire frontage of the property that is at the corner of Bailey and Cleveland.
Okay. Is there a mover? Or did we already move that? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Reyes.
Can I ask a question for Claire?
Yes, please do.
So what is, that property is currently zoned,
C4.
it's already zoned C4. So how does this change the stopgap? How does this stopgap? if it's-
Well, currently the C4 zone, the changes that we recently implemented, some of those changes are limited to that Pemberton and south.
Right, okay, I don't.
So this just extends.
I think the
Yeah.
intention was to make sure it goes around the corner and not just,
So can I?
yep, go ahead.
So I'm gonna oppose this. I just visited cities across the states and seeing their downtown development and the interesting architecture. I don't think every lot needs to be rezoned with exactly the same facades and architecture, and it really does mean that we're just having we've gone from interesting architecture and allowing different architecture to having step back architecture on every lot on Cleveland Avenue, and I'm worried about that because other towns are really interesting, and now we've just made it so that every building has to be step back. So I'm going to oppose this.
Well, we've already done that for Cleveland, this is just for that corner of Bailey.
Yep, I'm
Okay,
going to
just
just
clarify.
for something different.
Okay, I'm gonna call the question, all those in favor, opposed, Councillor Chappelle opposes, motion carries. Home occupation, that the committee support allowing parking for a maximum of 2 business vehicles associated with a home-based business to be permitted in the zoning amendment bylaw. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Blackman Wolf. I'll call the question, all those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Amendment to the RS3 zone, the council support the reduction of floor area ratio in the RS3 zone to reduce the maximum size of single detached dwelling permitted in the zone. Moved by Councillor Elliott, I'll second that. Call the question, all those in favor, opposed, motion carries. There are minutes for the Public Art Committee, I'll move those. Is there a seconder received? Seconded by Councillor Elliott, all those in favor, opposed if any, motion carries. Finance and Audit Standing Committee minutes be received for information from April 10th, moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And the committee recommendations were such that staff bring back revised bylaw with the following property tax rate and ratios. I won't read them out, they're in your agenda. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. Councillor Chappelle?
I'm going to be opposing these because of the property class business and other ratio being at 2.8, which is above the provincial average, and the disbursement of the taxes argument that we had the other day. Basically, by lowering it to the provincial average, you'd be raising residential taxes by $14 a year. But with the class change and us rezoning Cleveland Avenue, the C4 zoning is really prohibitive for businesses in the downtown. Our property taxes have gone up immensely. The small businesses are paying, and I have to correct something. Councillor Pryor the other day was mentioning that a small business in the downtown was paying $1,800, and therefore he was going to be, that he was fine with it. It was actually $18,000. So for small businesses, you may think that it's, the argument that was used to not tax residences, $14, was that it's becoming expensive in our community. It's becoming expensive in our community because businesses have to pay tax. That's passed on to the consumer. So if we're raising business taxes by $1,000, which is what this does on a small class of a business, you're literally raising small business taxes by $1,000 in order to save residences $14. I can guarantee I could save residences $14 by having $1,000 knocked off my taxes. So these ratios, although I do agree with some of them, with the property and business tax being so expensive right now, and Cleveland Avenue going up 17% in our BC assessment, I cannot support. You may think that 0.01 makes a big difference, makes hardly any difference. The small business owner is already struggling with our taxes being raised so much. So this, I cannot support the role ratios.
Councillor Pryor?
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I guess we don't have a chance to change this, because I did have a chance to talk to a bunch of the small businesses, and I was wrong when I said, you know, it's a lot more, their taxes are going a lot more up than I thought. And so every small business that I went into and talked to said they'd go for the residential ones more than the business ones, so. I can't change it now, but I don't support it.
Can we, for the sake of argument, I'm going to propose an amendment that we change the business class, property class 6, business and other, to 2.73. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Chappelle. And that would impact the residential class.
Yeah, thanks, because I mean, that's.
So on, we did discuss this at committee, and I believe Councillor Chappelle and I voted against it. But for the sake of, we love spending time together. Councillor Blackman-Wolf. On the amendment.
Yeah. I understand the rationale behind this. I just don't agree with the solution. I mean, my hope is that commercial property tax owners or commercial property owners did avail themselves of the appeal process vis-a-vis BC assessment if they feel like they did get an unfair assessment. That's something that applies to all taxpayers, residential, commercial, that. But do recognize that there is a significant market change. These things do happen sometimes, but I don't think that it's appropriate for us to shift it over into the residential class. As was discussed at the committee meeting, I was in favor of opening the budget process to try and cut a bit of the budget so that we could get down to that number, but that didn't seem to get too much traction, so I think I'm going to vote against this and go with the vote against the 2.73.
Councillor Chappelle.
Thanks. When you think about $14 a year if you're a residential homeowner and how much you have to pay in business taxes, and you know, you hope that your council is going to look at ratios and analysis, and actually, you know, we need to encourage employment. We're going to lose employment. There's businesses that where they can't get amended because we put residential, we've now made it so that our future zoning of C4 and our density has affected our property taxes. And yes, you can appeal, but it gives you very little. It doesn't bring it back down to your 1940s building as it should be. But, you know, a 17% increase on Cleveland Avenue, you can be guaranteed that people are just, those small businesses are straining to stay open. And we have sign by law. It's not your only expense at a district. Our district, we have tons of business expenses, like pretty much everything, like in tax and water. And when we have high rates, and I don't mind paying high rates in water and sewer, there's an amazing benefit to taxes. And $14 for a resident, if you can't afford a $14 increase, you're probably not going to be able to afford any of your taxes. But, you know, a significant increase in your business taxes, you have to pass that on to your employees who have to find a place to live in this town. We already can't find employees to live in this town. So now I have to pass on my tax increase to my employees, and I have to ensure that they have a place to live in town and can afford a place to live. Passing on $14 a year for a person that's has a renter or has to raise taxes or raise their rents to make an extra $14, or has to rent out their Airbnb because we don't have any policy on that either. Passing that on is pretty easy to earn $14. But when you raise your business taxes, those expenses get passed down to the public, and then the public says it's too expensive to live here. It's because our taxes go up, and it's a multiplier. It's not 2.80. It's a multiplier that ends up being 9% increase on your tax rate as a residential, as a business, as a small business owner. And yes, it's the Walmarts and everything else, but it's also the small business owners, and we want to maintain small business employment.
I'm just going to ask Christine, Councillor Chappelle talked about $14, and I think I think council knows what she's saying, but I just don't want it to be confusing to the public. And so you just clarify what Councillor Chappelle is trying to articulate.
I'll do my best to remember all the numbers that we moved around, but essentially we were looking at the average property per each class. So we essentially took the assessment value, divided it by the folios, and in doing that assessment, when we moved one up or down, it impacted the average dollar increase. And I believe that, I'm sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but originally it was going to be about a $74 increase for residential overall, and per Councillor Chappelle's indication, if we moved it to 2.75, she's indicating that that would go up $14.
Yeah, I think it went up to 90, so $14 to $16.
Probably
but
about
I just
right.
want to make sure it's clear what we're talking about. That's not the tax increase. That's the change. If we brought business class down to 2.73, it would push residential up to $14, $16 more than the increase that's already considered.
Exactly, and again, the percentages make that look a little more startling. I think it was just under 5% or 4.74
Do you remember the reduction in the impact to commercial? I think it went from sort of 800 to 5 something, just a couple $100.
I think the lowest we were able to get it down with the 2.6 was about 482. So I think it would only.
2.73 is what's on the table.
Yes, I don't recall running exactly 2.73 when we were doing the indications. So I think it brought it down somewhere in the $500 range.
That's what, I just wanted to make sure we were all talking about the same thing.
I have the numbers if you want. I can just tell you.
Do you have the specific number? Well, actually, I'll go to Councillor Pryor, I believe, and Councillor Elliott.
I'm good.
You good,
Thanks.
Councillor Elliott?
I'm not gonna support the amendment. You know, I think that it's well within the provincial, the range for, municipalities around us. I think it's very close to the provincial average. Business taxes are an expense that businesses can write off. And, quite frankly, in my opinion, the only thing that results in lower taxes is smaller budgets. And that's the work this council needs to do. It's been trying to catch up and put money into much needed infrastructure. But probably the time is right to look at where we can be more efficient now that there's growth in the community and create smaller budgets. So I will support the amendment.
I'd like to call the question on the amendment. Sorry, Councillor Reese and Councillor Schwab.
Thank you. I'm not supporting it either. And I remember the discussion at council, and my recollection is that the change from 2.8 to 2. I think it was 2.7 we're talking about, was just a couple $100 for the average business. So smaller businesses would be less than that, larger businesses more. And this will give a break to some of the larger businesses in our community, which I don't think is necessarily warranted. I agree, these are very close to the provincial average. They're less than surrounding communities. And so I think we are fine at 2.8, and I will not support the amendment.
Councillor Schwab.
Thanks. Other surrounding communities have employment. That's where we have to travel to because we don't have small businesses to be employed with. So it's awesome to have a tax rate when you have a healthy economy and businesses that can support you and employment to support you. We have 40% of our community commuting outside, and then we have people leaving the community because they can't afford to live here, and people have to, I suppose, buy online because they can't afford small businesses. And it just creates this economic circle, and as Councillor Race points out, I have an education in this now, actually understanding the economy and small business and how much small businesses contribute to the well-being of our district. When you push your taxes onto a small business and say, oh, you can write it off, it's not like that. No, you have to come up with the money. It's not, oh, I can write it off. I don't say, yay, my taxes went off, I'll just write them off on my profit. I have to raise my profits in order to make that money. So when my profits are going, when I can't make profit, and it all comes out of my profit, and my small business can't run, and I have to shut it down, and then the gap comes in and takes over, and they don't care if they make a loss because they have 10 other businesses in the area that can make the money back. That's why you get box stores. I want to maintain our small businesses by giving them the provincial average. It's not keeping it, it's not below the provincial average, it is the provincial average, and that's the 2.73 that's being suggested. We are over the provincial average. We could be at the provincial average, and it didn't make $100 or a few $100s. It makes thousands of dollars a difference on your if your property goes up by 17% or 19% or an immense amount when you're being based on the fact that you're adding residential density on top of your properties. So I am hoping that Council, and Councillor Race did support this, and then he didn't support it, and then he did support it. So I'm not sure why it's that $14 for residential is just making a point, but it really does affect small businesses, and being a small business owner, I find it really difficult to sit in a council that doesn't want to deal with provincial averages and giving a break to your small businesses for $14.
I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Blackenwolf, Elliott, Kent, and Race opposed. Motion fails. On the main motion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Chappelle and myself opposed. Motion carries. And prior opposed. Motion carries. Ports property tax. That council. This is with regard to the letter to Prince Rupert. That council support modernization of the Ports Property Tax Act to allow for local flexibility and ensure community resilience. That the tax rate cap be repealed and replaced with a formula that allows municipalities to determine local tax rate, and that any modernization changes to the port property tax do not unfairly impact the ports financially. Provincial grant reallocation directly to ports, for example, and that a separate tax class be created for ports separated from other heavy industrial activities. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Elliott. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We had a whole bunch of in-camera announcements. We're just going to put them on the next one. Okay. There is no unscheduled public attendance. Open question period for clarification related to agenda item. Yeah, come on up. You can ask over on the microphone. We've got a couple people. Please introduce yourself.
Council, my name is Gurmeet Katra, 4000 Highway 99, and this is in regards to OCP Bylaw 2500. Councillor Reyes had said about sidecar for 4000 Highway 99, so I just want to know about that.
So, is Jonas still here? No. Linda, who wants to speak to this?
Mayor Hensman, thank you. Linda Glende, CAO. At this point, I would recommend that Mr. Katra meet with staff to better understand the issue and options available to him as the landowner.
Yeah. And I think it doesn't preclude any amendment theoretically coming forward. What council was saying is that at this point, not initiating a sidecar, but there could be an amendment in the future in theory. Do you want to clarify what you said, because he did specifically reference you, Councillor?
No, I did, and I did mention that and stated I thought it was a bit of an anomaly, at least as far as I was concerned. What I didn't want to do was to amend the main bylaw, because that, as we had the discussion, would have put it back to second reading and sort of taken steps backward in the process before we went forward again. So we can deal with it in a future amendment, much as we considered doing with some other things tonight and didn't agree on, but we can still do that, and I expect there still will be a discussion. I think there might be another property out there as well, so it's still an open subject as far as I'm concerned to possibly correct that growth management problem. But there's nothing definite on the floor yet, but we can wait for staff. I would suggest that if you want to have a discussion with staff, and staff can bring that to us for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Londa. Okay.
Haley Ritchie from the Squamish Chief. Really similar question there, but I just wanted to be super clear on the OCP. So does this mean this version we're taking it most likely to adoption to be finalized without any sidecar discussions?
At this point, there's no sidecar OCP amendment to consider. Doesn't mean a month, 3 months, 6 months down the road, new council in December, that's always a possibility. But at this point, no sidecar is being proposed. And third reading will go to the SLRD to have the regional context statement voted on there, and we'll come back for consideration of adoption by this council.
Great, thanks.
Fair enough, Linda? No more questions for clarification purposes? Council or staff announcements? It's so hard doing it at the end of the day because I forget about them all. Just really quickly. Thank you, that helps me. I did want to say something about the passing of Rena Henry, who is Dale Harry's and Terry Ann's daughter. There was a community gathering to celebrate her life last week, and it was great. It was beautiful. I was asked to be a witness, so it's my responsibility as a witness to make sure I share the experience with people and keep that story alive. And one thing that just struck me as quite wonderful about how the nation goes about all these things is there's always learning and catharsis through everything they do, and it's very community, and they have this process whereby members just get up and they give money to buy a handkerchief to, you know, wipe the tears of Terry Ann, or to go to whatever the family may need, and Tombstone or whatever, and then the community leader that's sort of engaged in this process, and then basically says, and now we're going to forget about that, as if the person who's giving it isn't doing it for acknowledgement or credit. This is simply a gesture, and now we forget about that and we think about the big picture. So there's just beautiful, I don't know if Linda or Gary want to share, but it's just so hard for that community. My heart, I know all of our sympathies and heart go out to Dale and Terry Ann, and hopefully we find some resolution there, but just wanted to convey my witnessing of this beautiful celebration of her life. She obviously impacted her cohort up at Hilltop House very profoundly. They simply loved her, it seemed, and was a great friend, and just seemed like a lovely young girl. So just wanted to convey that. One other thing I forgot to mention, the Columbia Institute had a conference down in the city, and they got all their participants and panels and everything to pay into a carbon offsetting program, and Columbia Institute would like to actually buy carbon offsets in our marketplace once that's up and running. So I thought that was kind of cool for them to offer. And that's pretty much it for me. Don't know what else is coming up this week. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Strong.
I graduated with a degree this week.
Oh, congratulations.
That was exciting 2-year process.
That's well done.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I don't see it. I will look for a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everybody.